This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Lisa Mateo on permanent assignment right now. She's somewhere warmer.
I hope so.
That's what we know right now. John Tucker in for Paul Sweeney. John Tucker, 50-50 bet. You think Sweeney remembers how to do this?
Absolutely not. Which is a good thing.
Exactly.
Tanned and rested, Paul
Wipe the
Sweeney is
slate
back. You're smarter than we are. We know that. I mean, John and I are winter pal as well. Good morning, Millinocket, Maine.
Really?
It's at the edge of 92.9 broadcast.
Okay.
Up by Mount Katahdin, 7 below zero.
Wow.
Light wind chills -12.
Oh, boy.
As well.
Well, here, I mean, in New York City, for those who care, 10 degrees outside feels like 4 degrees.
It is cold. It is cold back to 1977, and I remember that. I won't bore you with it on here, but I have the clearest memories of a bitterly cold 1977. We hope you're warm and toasty. We've got a wonderful lineup for you today to launch a 4-day week. Netflix with earnings this week.
Oh, boy.
That will be important, but lots to talk about. And we'll start strong. Terry Haynes will join us here in a moment. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. We're brought to you by CohnReznick, advisory, assurance, and tax. With potential changes on the horizon, will you need to rethink your tax strategy? CohnReznick Tax Advisors, they can help keep your business at the forefront. And in this tax season, we say thank you to CohnReznick, heritage supporters of what we do here at Bloomberg Surveillance. We're out on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Had a phenomenal weekend on YouTube. Thank you to Caroline Epker and team in London. An important interview on Friday with Nigel Farage, which was driving forward the United Kingdom debate as well. Thanks to Nathan for playing that on Daybreak. As well. Futures up 14. Let's get right to it from the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash. John Tucker.
First full trading day ahead of that after the inauguration. Stocks pointing to a higher open. Among the most actively traded, you have shares of NVIDIA up about 0.6%. That's rising along with the rival chip makers. President Trump rescinding about 80 executive orders signed by Joe Biden, including one from October 2023 aimed at limiting AI risks. And you had 3M just reporting fourth quarter results roughly in line with expectations. The company doesn't expect profit to grow this year. Part of the turnaround, adjusted earnings in 2025 should be $7.60 to $7.90 a share, but that is shy of analyst projections. U.S.-listed Chinese stocks, Alibaba, for instance, they are rising as President Trump held back from announcing any tariffs on Chinese goods on the first full day in office. Dow futures up 130, S&P E-mini futures up 13, the NASDAQ futures up 51. Two-year yield down 2 basis points, 426. The 10-year 4 basis points lower. That right now is at 458. Paul, in his recorded opening lines, he says, inflation, still a thing out there. Look at the price of retail gasoline in New Jersey.
Yes. Here we go. Wawa update.
Wawa $3.15 a gallon.
Wow, we're
this
back
morning.
above.
It was $2.70 just a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I mean, you got WTI crude oil just under $76 a barrel. So there you go.
All right, we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you. Thank you, John Tucker. Greatly appreciate that. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene here. We get started on the equity markets right now. Sam Stovall really getting us a good brief here in a 4-day work week. He's, of course, with CFRA. Sam, what's your confidence that earnings deliver? I mean, forget about your star system and your wonderful acuity. Just thumb up, thumb down. Are earnings going to be double digit?
Good morning, Tom. Thumbs up. At the beginning of the quarter, expectations were for about an 8.7% rise, according to S&P Capital IQ consensus estimates. Now we're at 9.3, and I just remind myself that in 60 of the last 62 quarters, actual results exceeded end-of-quarter estimates, proving once again that management does a very good job of managing expectations. And the outperformance was by a good 3 to 5 percentage points.
Yeah, I didn't see you in the audience in the rotunda yesterday. I know you were back a little bit, but the tech guys were up front. Is this a good moment for technology in terms of delivering revenue growth, cash flow, and earnings? Or are they going to Washington hat in hand?
No, I think that it is a good period ahead for all of those items you mentioned. We put out reports recently indicating that we feel that they have good, strong balance sheets, good free cash flow projections, et cetera. For this quarter, we're looking for about a 15% gain in earnings and also expecting to see a fairly solid growth in profit margins. So, basically technology along with communication services, consumer discretionary, and financials continue to be leaders. And history says that those sectors that outperformed from election day to inauguration day continue to beat the market for the full year, an average of 75% of the time.
So, Sam, how did your outlook for stocks change over the last, since election day? We've now got the new administration seated. We've got a Congress that seems pretty settled at the moment. Did your outlook change? What are you telling your clients these days?
Well, I'm still telling clients that I'm a bull, but with a lowercase b. I think that we will have a good year, but not a double-digit increase. Actually, since World War II, we've only seen 1 in 5 likelihood of a third double-digit gain after an initial down year. I do think that because we're in the third year of this bull market, that we will be seeing increased volatility. But overall, I still believe that there is upward trajectory, but it'll be driven by earnings, not PE multiple expansion.
Paul, I was sitting there with a beverage of my choice in my hand last night, getting through the day, and I was reciting to the fam a surgeon once who said to me, "Look, Tom, all I want is 20% per year."
Right.
And that's Sam is beautiful. Like, heaven forbid we get back to a single-digit reality.
Exactly. Hey, Sam, I mean, in terms of economic policy coming out of the new administration, I guess the only thing we probably learned yesterday is that tariffs as it relates to Mexico and Canada are still very, very much on the table here, maybe sooner rather than later. Does that factor into your calculus for these markets?
Yes, it does, Tom. I mean, basically, it would imply that inflation could end up being stickier than anticipated. And as a result, the Fed will be slower to lower interest rates. We did cut our number of rate cuts from 4 to 2, pretty much as the market did. And now we're looking for 2 25 basis point cuts, one in the second quarter of this year and the second in the fourth quarter of this year. So really, it's a question of what the trade tariffs and other policy moves does to the inflation forecast.
And on the other side of the equation, Sam, I mean, a lot of folks are saying that they really sense animal spirits being unleashed in the markets here as it relates to the new administration. Perhaps lower taxes, lower regulation, maybe some deal activity picking up. Does that seem reasonable to you?
Well, it does, because if you look at some indicators like the relative strength between consumer discretionary and consumer staples, whether it's on a cap-weighted basis or an equal-weighted basis, we're still pointing to a risk-on environment. So I would tend to say that as we start off this new administration, also a positive move from Election Day implies 80% of the time we see continued advance during the first 100 days of the new administration.
Sam Stovall, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. Too short a visit today, but we got to go to Washington news. Sam Stovall there in the equity market sounds like he's participating, as you would expect from CFRA. This is a joy and an honor, actually, to start with Terry Haynes. He has provided a clarity out on LinkedIn and through his wonderful work at Pangea on the political storm of Washington. I wanted to interview Terry at the top of the show. Eric Javits who was a designer of the hat for Melania. I mean, that was basically, but after the hat for Melania, what is the Haynes takeaway from this inaugural day?
Everything flows from the hat, Tom, and good morning to you. I am I'm the entire war room here this morning. So I guess my immediate take for markets is essentially just is, look, there's two kinds of uncertainty. One is a policy uncertainty that will continue for quite a while. I think people understood that if they weren't completely prepared for it. The second is that, and I don't want to make too much of this, but there's a little bit of uncertainty about which Trump we get, which president we get. Do we get the focused statesman of the inauguration speech, or do we get the guy who gave us unstructured remarks that were longer than the inauguration speech?
Right.
And that's an undercurrent.
Terry, an important question. This came up not once but twice yesterday within the pageantry and the uniqueness of this Trump inauguration. Can he form a government? And I say that with respect to resignations at state, the portrait of Milley going down at the Pentagon, and others. Do you have a confidence? Forget about the headline people like Rubio, unanimous. But can he form the 200, the 500, the 2,000 people to get things done?
Yeah, I think he can. Most of the vast majority of the cabinet nominees are on track. You've got a situation where most of the resignations at state, by the way, the vast majority were people that were supposed to be leaving anyway, and you've got some people that don't want to work for him. He frankly welcomes that. Beyond that, you've got roughly 4,000 people to populate, and I think he'll do that. There's never a shortage of people that want to work in an administration.
Terry, what's the I guess on the to-do list for this first 100 days? What do you realistically expect this administration to get done?
Well, in the first 100 days, I think what you'll see a lot of action on tariffs, and I continue to hammer for markets that tariffs are a geopolitical tool, and that Trump couldn't have been clearer about that last night. I mean, if you're talking about why you're doing this is fentanyl and the border. I mean, you're talking, among other things, geopolitics. So there's that. We're in a situation where geopolitics will continue to shape markets going forward. You'll get the cabinet folks into place. You will see a lot of kind of arranging of the regulatory agencies at SEC and others with Paul Atkins at SEC. You will see them kind of launch a regulatory agenda that will complete by the first year. And you'll see Trump and Congress continue to wrangle around about exactly how they're going to attack tax cuts and the border and all the rest. But I don't think that's definitely not going to get resolved in the first 100 days.
Terry, if I'm an M&A banker or an M&A lawyer on Wall Street, should I be dusting off some of these deals that I've maybe had on the shelf over the past couple of years?
Oh yeah, I think so. The the animal spirits are going to be very strong on M&A, of course, and I think there's a reset. One of the reasons why I hammer on geopolitics is that markets are very used to hearing from Washington kind of small ball political, how politics will incrementally move an issue one way or the other. But now we're in a situation where there's think of it as a new time of where geopolitics is not only going to really dictate a lot of how Trump deals with things economically, but it also forces a relook of exactly how you want to approach kind of large companies and marshal them for geopolitical and national security ends. That's a lot of what the tech reset is about.
Terry Haynes with us with Pangea Policy. Thanks to Sam Stovall on the equity markets here moments ago. We continue with Mr. Haynes. We welcome all of you across a frigid America. Good morning on Apple CarPlay. Android Auto, good morning, 99.1 FM in Washington, home of the Washington Commanders.
Yes, we saw that coming.
92.9 FM, good morning up in frigid Boston. In New York, 12 degrees in Central Park. Be careful out there. It's cold, particularly the ice. The ice is, Terry Haynes will tell you, the ice is the issue. We're on YouTube. Good morning. Mr. Haynes, I want to talk about Rubio. I think that with all the uproar, we've had a shockingly dearth discussion of our Secretary of State, unanimous from his brethren in the Senate. The gentleman from Florida, how much does he dislike Beijing?
I think like or dislike is beside the point. I think what you should look for on China policy is fairly classic carrot stick. And one of the reasons I say that is because I've been paying attention to what Rubio and other nominees have been saying, and also
Right.
what Trump's saying. You've got a situation where they will continue their resolve to want to provide sticks wherever necessary, and tariffs or wherever else to try to manage China's behavior. But also there are a variety of carrots. And TikTok, for example, is a perfect example of what I say. Markets are completely focused on the TikTok thing as some kind of avatar. From a geopolitical perspective, TikTok's a relatively small issue,
Right.
but it's an important issue, and it stands beside what markets aren't focused on, which is the infiltration by China of the United States telecom.
Okay, but carrot and stick, Teddy Roosevelt had John Hay. Where's the John Hay in Marco Rubio?
I think you'll see, the Hayes style was, in time, was very different than Rubio's. I think what you're going to see is a lot more smiling and kind of softer rhetoric from the Secretary of State to complement the harder rhetoric of the Commander-in-Chief.
Terry, should we expect any real fireworks for some of the remaining confirmations here of some of the cabinet positions?
Oh, yeah, I think so. There's still... most of the list that existed then still exists now. You've got Gabbard, I think, in some trouble. You've got Patel at the FBI in some trouble. Hegseth barely managed a committee vote. Probably good for confirmation, but it's not a done deal by any means. Even Bob Kennedy has some explaining to do, I think. Although he looks better than not.
Terry, too short. Terry Haynes, thank you so much with Pangea Policy. Greatly appreciate it. Folks, it's a clinic. If you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn for no other reason than to follow Terry Haynes of Pangea Policy. Of course, another reason to stay on LinkedIn is to see Michael Barr's long discussions of the Detroit Lions. We'll discuss that here in a moment. Futures up 22 with our news in New York City. M. Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and John. President Trump wasted no time signing a wide range of executive orders impacting foreign and domestic policy. He quickly rescinded dozens of Biden-era executive actions and took steps on everything from TikTok to the southern border. Minutes after Trump officially took the office, officials shut down the CBP One app. It was set up during the Biden administration to help process migrants applying for asylum. Talking to reporters about the Ukraine war, Trump also says Ukraine's president wants to make a deal while Putin is destroying Russia by not making a deal.
I think it'd be very well off to end that war. We have numbers that almost 1 million Russian soldiers have been killed. About 700,000 Ukrainian soldiers are killed. Russia's bigger, they have more soldiers to lose. But that's no way to run a country.
Trump also pardoned or commuted the 1,500 plus people charged with the crimes in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. Kamala Harris arrived in Southern California Monday night after attending the presidential inauguration in Washington. The now former VP and her husband visiting the site of the Eaton fire in Los Angeles, not far from their home that survived the Palisades fire.
We went and visited Rural Central Kitchen. I mean, the volunteers who are there, some of them who lost their own homes, are there doing the work of taking care of perfect strangers who, in the face of that stranger, they see a neighbor.
Meanwhile, a second day of windy and dry conditions is forecast for Southern California, raising the risk of new wildfires. Afghanistan's Taliban government has announced the release of 2 Americans in a prisoner exchange. The 2 U.S. citizens were exchanged for a Taliban figure serving a life sentence in a California prison on drug trafficking and terrorism charges. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
And now nationwide, we attend, Vet Bill bet on the Lions.
Oh, boy.
Really upset.
Yep.
What happened, Michael Barr?
Jared Goff picked the worst time to have a bad game. I think he had like 5 turnovers.
Yeah, lots of turnovers.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big Jared Goff fan, but boy, that was the wrong time to have an off game.
They've already lost to coach the Bears, right?
Ben Johnson, I believe,
is going to the Chicago Bears.
Wow.
Are they going to lose a coach to the New York Jets?
Yeah, that's a good question.
That's what I'm hearing this morning. Yeah, Aaron Glenn.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Has
hearing
that
this
happened, Si? I don't think
Hasn't
we've had
happened
an
yet, but
announcement yet. Maybe.
Expectation.
That's maybe news. Expectation news. Yeah. I mean, it was like a free-for-all.
Yeah.
It was painful.
It was painful to watch. Trust me.
Fortunately, Buffalo came through. I mean, is this Super Bowl this weekend? Buffalo, Kansas City?
The last time I predicted, I thought the Ravens were going to go all the way. We see what happened, that part of the equation. And it could be. It could be. But there's a good chance you might see the same two. You might see Kansas City against Philadelphia.
Same
Kansas
thing
City,
again.
Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it's fun.
Pay attention.
You know, I would pay attention. And it's become big. It's just the gambling, Paul, right? I mean,
Yeah,
ratings are like ginormous.
Huge, and the gambling's been a big shot in the arm for as if it needed it. But again, bigger and better than ever. NFL.
Yeah. We got to get Brian Eggers on.
Yeah.
We got a guy at Bloomberg, folks, expert on all this betting, Brian Eggers. We'll get him on here a lot here coming up as well. Bills, Kansas City, 6:30 p.m., CBS, Sunday. Be there. Futures up 21 right now. Night list to the equity market. The VIX 15.82. On YouTube, Bloomberg Surveillance.
News 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom, with this Bloomberg Business Flash being brought to you by BAM. BAM Mutual. He insures municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provides guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Learn more about municipal bond credit quality. Visit BAMBonds.com. Let me start with Treasury yields. They're lower. Fears that Donald Trump's policies are going to fuel inflation kind of easing after Trump didn't impose China-specific tariffs, at least for now. Right now, the 2-year, 2 basis points lower, 4.26. The 10-year yield down 5 basis points. That's at $4.57. DXY right now, that is down 0.6%. And ahead of the cash open on Wall Street, futures pointing to a higher open. Dow futures up 197 points. S&P E-minis up 22 points. The Nasdaq futures right now 94 points higher. Among the most actively traded Apple iPhone sales, they plunged 18% in China during the December quarter. That's according to Counterpoint Research. As a result, shares of Apple in the pre-market, they are down 2%. Orsted shares slumping. It recorded a $1.7 billion hit to its earnings as the cost of building offshore wind farms in the U.S. that keeps rising. And employees worldwide ranking work-life balance higher than salary for the first time. This according to a global survey by Randstad. Of the 26,000 people asked, 83% prioritized flexibility. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash Points.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Futures advance up 20 now, up 23. NASDAQ about even with that. Percentage move 0.5% on the NASDAQ 100. The foreign exchange market is the litmus paper of the system. It's been very important. We saw the whiplash yesterday. We had a great story out in the Bloomberg. Thank you, Ted Mann, Liz Capel-McCormick, and Esha Day for a really sharp article about the roller coaster, they call it, that we saw in dollar dynamics yesterday. Right now, we recalibrate with Barclays and their Skylar Montgomery Counting, their FX strategist out of the United Kingdom. Skylar, good morning. Can Barclays bet resilient and strong dollar, or do you adjust on this Tuesday?
I don't think we've heard anything in the last couple of days to really adjust our view. I think broadly it's accepted that the current environment is dollar positive. We've had such a large move that the question we're consistently getting from clients is how far can this strength extend? And for us, we wouldn't fade the dollar strength, and particularly with reference to euro dollar. The move we've seen, it's not been exclusively driven by tariffs, right? It's also been by growth and rate differentials. U.S. growth continues to be stronger than its DXY counterparts. And that's meant higher yields in the U.S. than elsewhere, and that's also played a role here. So it's not just tariff threats alone that point to more dollar upside.
Skyler, I mean, I'm looking at the Bloomberg Dollar Index up over 7% just since late September, call it. Is there a bear case for the U.S. dollar?
So we get asked this quite a lot as well, kind of what are the reasons or catalysts that you could see for dollar downside? And certainly there are options, right? You know, there's not a complete regardless of that in terms of you could see more fiscal cohesion in Europe. That would be more positive. If you got more supersized stimulus out of China, that would also be more positive. If you just had less hawkishness on trade, again, that would be more positive for those DXY counterparts. I think the issue is just none of those baselines are coming through, and they're certainly not our baseline.
How about in Asia here? What is the Bank of Japan doing? What do they need to do? How do you guys think about the yen here?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the yen, its near-term upside seems more limited, especially versus the dollar. The January Bank of Japan meeting, it's pretty much completely priced in for a 25 basis point hike. I think topside in dollar yen at some point, you get some kind of cap because of Japanese authorities' reaction function to FX weakness. But given we've had this spate of yen strength recently, we're not quite at levels where that comes into the picture. More medium term, though, we do like buying yen on the crosses. I think the direction of policy is clear. Obviously, we're expecting a hike this week, but we also expect a hike later in this year. That gets to a policy rate of 0.75%. And certainly neutral expectations for Japan are kind of drifting more towards the 1% level in markets. And then they're also less vulnerable to tariff risks. And the volatility of a trade war could be more positive for safe havens, too.
Is there a big figure trade out there? I mean, forget about all the 60,000 feet stuff, Tyler. I lost money on the Detroit Lions. I know, I mean, it's like losing money on Man U. No, it's not. It's like losing money on somebody good. But the answer is, I got to make it back in the next 6 months, Skyler. Where's the big figure bet for Barclays?
I mean, in terms of places that you'll get the largest move, I think CNY is where you should be looking, especially versus the dollar. There's been a mispricing in terms of where tariff risk is really showing up. It's showing up in Europe so far, but not so much in China. And the growth backdrop, as well as just fundamentally the backdrop for CNY, is for a weaker CNY, even if you don't account for tariff threats. And so that tariff threat should be more reflected in that cross. And for us, we're looking at 750 originally on dollar CNY.
Wow.
How about we've had, just in the last 24 hours, Skylar, a pretty clear commentary out of the new administration about tariffs on Mexico and Canada. How do you play that in the currency markets? Do you, in fact, trade that? You try to set it aside? How do you think about that?
I mean, I think you have to trade it. You have to seriously take these threats under consideration. Canada and Mexico are very exposed to the U.S. in a relative way. So 75% of Canadian exports go to the U.S. It's not reciprocal by any means. And most of Canadian GDP, or a significant portion of it at least, is generated by those exports. And so it's much more worrying for those economies that you have the threat of tariffs, and that supersedes anything else that you have domestically. But domestically, particularly in Canada, the backdrop's not great either. You're in a period where Parliament's prorogued. There's not a lot of political legitimacy behind the current government, and that is an opportunity for Trump, I think.
Skylar, what's the shadow out there for dollar certitude? Unfortunately, Paul was away on a sabbatical, and I was inflicted Damian Sassower upon me, Skylar. And of course, he's EM, EIEIO. What's the shadow out there in EM Barclays is worried about?
I think really the threat of hikes returning to the table. It's something that we definitely need to consider in 2025. If you look at the historical experience, there's this natural tendency for the market to look for hikes ahead of the end of the cutting cycle. And typically in soft landings, the cutting cycle and the pause that follows, it's much shorter than in recessionary periods. So that implies that in 2025, we need to be thinking about this. And if you look back at the soft landings of 98 and 95, there was some concern over energy inflation, but core inflation actually declined between the last cut and the next hike of the next cycle. And so while the Fed's mandate is more symmetrical now, there's more relative weight put on unemployment. I think if you had that come back to the fore, and certainly it's something markets are thinking about, that would be very negative for EM.
Skylar, I got to run on breaking news. This has been great. Don't be a stranger. Skylar, if you're in New York, we have to do an extended Skylar Montgomery Koenig interview. FX strategist with Barclays. Thank you so much, Skylar. Paul, this is the heart of the matter, folks. And, you know, I'm not doing securities analysis, Graham Dodd-Cottle. I got a single headline, which is an immovable force. Charles Schwab, fourth quarter total client assets up 19%.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a big, I'm sorry, it's that like is, large.
Yeah, put out some numbers today. Charles Schwab, some good results. Stock up 3.5% here today, pre-market trading, Tom. And we saw from the big banks last week, just really strong results out of their capital markets business.
Were you following the big banks last week?
Oh, yes, exactly, from the beach. You know, equity desks, fixed income desks, commodity desks, they were all printing money. And you see that again here with Schwab. And as you call out the assets under management, that's their business, Tom, gathering assets.
And exactly, gathering assets. And, you know, I'm making this up, folks, as we go. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm modeling $7 trillion, which is more than the tech guys lined up at the inauguration.
Yeah, exactly.
$7 trillion in money market funds. When do we start talking $8 trillion?
Yeah.
With a huge body of that going into the Liz Ann Saunders company.
Exactly right, going into ETFs, you take a Charles Schwab, a TD Ameritrade, all these folks just gathering assets at a really strong clip. And that's why we've seen, you think about Morgan Stanley years ago with Mr. Gorman, really increasing the focus on asset management, wealth management. Boy, was that a good decision for Morgan
these
Stanley.
Numbers good enough where Kevin Gordon may not lose his job?
I think he's in good shape.
He's in good shape.
He's in good shape. He's a good young analyst. We appreciate getting some of his time.
We're into earnings season, folks, and we've got such expertise led by Gina Martin-Adams and everybody from the street. We'll give you the granularity of it, the numbers, the ratios, but sometimes it's just concept, which is Schwab up $3 off of a huge, as Paul mentions, a huge intake.
And Tom, your friends at MoffettNathanson, they're busy this morning. They upgraded Warner Brothers Discovery from neutral to buy, downgraded Fox from buy to neutral. So a little bit of a swap there on the media space from our good friends at MoffettNathanson.
You missed Michael Nathanson with us here the other day.
Yeah.
He was a huge value added, particularly about the fire. The best thing I heard, Lucas Shaw in the Note this weekend, they're already back producing TV shows.
Yep.
They're back to work in L.A., even with the huge horror out there as well. We're out on YouTube. Thank you so much. Major shout out. One Christopher Pitt, Carolyn Hepker in London, moving the needle on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance. Stay warm.
Bloomberg Sports Report was brought to you by Audi. Visit your tri-state Audi dealer today and get behind the wheel of the Audi model. you've always wanted. Coming up, we're going to check in with Jennifer Lee, senior economist at BMO Capital Markets. Talk about the tariff reversals and how the U.S. and Canadian economies could fare in the face of 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Tariffs coming up will have the economic impact. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's head back to Schwab. Those shares pre-market up over 5%. Fourth quarter adjusted earnings per share beating estimates there. The stock futures overall point to a higher cash open on Wall Street. Among the most actively traded pre-market shares of NVIDIA up 0.5%. President Trump revoking a Biden-era executive order limiting AI risk. Apple's shares 2% lower. Sales of iPhones dived over 18% in China during the December quarter. That's according to some independent research. Right now, Dow futures up 205, S&P futures up 24, NASDAQ futures up 106. By the way, TikTok did restore access for all the existing users. Google and Apple, however, still have not reinstated TikTok to their apps. And Charlie Pellet checks in and says, yeah, my TikTok is working on the train. So
really? Okay.
Just the update there on your TikTok. Tic-tac.
Charlie Pellet's on TikTok?
Oh, he's addicted to it.
Really?
It's insane.
Are you on TikTok?
Please. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Did you just imagine that?
No, I can't, because you've got the same cell phone Michael Douglas had in that movie years ago as well. What I know is futures advance are up 20, we're now up 24, and the VIX under 16, 15.76. The 10-year real yield's what I watch religiously. I've got a 2.15 there. It's coming a little bit, but not drama central right now. Speaking of drama central, she was outstanding the last time she was on. She has to put up with Brian Belsky on a daily basis with BMO Capital Markets. Their senior economist, Jennifer Lee, joins us. Jennifer, just open question after the pageantry of the last 3-4 days. What are you writing about this morning? What is the Jennifer Lee focus on a post-inaugural Tuesday?
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for having me on. And I still love Mr. Belsky. This morning was the focus. All the focus was on, of course, the U.S. dollar index and the volatility in the currency market, and that was in sharp display. Of course, after the shock comments that he was made, almost offhandish. I was sort of wondering last night, would he have brought up tariffs if he wasn't asked? Legitimate question, obviously. And I was talking to myself, and I was thinking, why was I surprised? He said he's doing everything that he said he was going to do during the campaign. So, this shouldn't come as a shock. It's just whether or not it's going to come to fruition. And that's anyone's guess at this point.
What will Canada do? Does the Bank of Montreal first of all, does the Bank of Montreal have any insight whether the Canadians can outlast the Bruins? I mean, we'll have to see. I haven't said that in like 8 years. No. But Jennifer Lee, how will Canada respond to tariffs from America? Do you have any perspective there from the Bank of Montreal?
This is more coming from the political side. All the provinces have gotten together, and all but one has, everyone's talking about retaliation and having also targeted tariffs as well on U.S. products. Again, it's we're gonna have to see how this plays out. It's all about the art of negotiation, as President Trump is always talking about. Again, I don't know. I'm not sure whether or not we're going to see. From the U.S. side of things, 25% tariffs on all U.S. or all Canadian products. I call it like the W5, right? Like the WHO. We're talking right now about Canada and Mexico. When will this happen? Was February 1st a hard date, or are we just going to talk about it first? It's just throwing it out there as a possibility. The whereof is like the WHO, and how this is going to play out, especially again. Will there be a lengthy period of negotiations? And are we targeting every single thing, or are we only looking at, are we looking at all Canadian products, or are we targeting certain ones only? And these are all questions that need to be answered before we can figure out what we are going to do.
Good morning out on YouTube from London, Ontario, which is the absolute, I'm speaking as an ugly American, is the absolute epicenter of good ice hockey and also exports to the United States.
Exports. So Jennifer, you're based in Toronto there. What's the feeling in Canada, in Toronto, about maybe some of what you guys could do, what Canadians could do in terms of on tariffs on your side?
So it's overall, obviously it's a feeling of unease. This is something that, nobody wants, obviously. The U.S. is the destination of 75% of our exports. And we import, most of our imports, come from the U.S. as well. And from the U.S., most of the U.S. exports head to both Mexico and Canada. So this is like something that, that is not something that we would relish. But in terms of preparation, I don't know if there is a set plan right now, but, almost, just being prepared for much slower growth than what we have penciled in right now. We've got just under 2% penciled in for 2025 GDP growth for Canada this year. And of course, that could be potentially erased if we launch into a protracted trade war with the U.S. And again, it will depend on what products are targeted at what, is it going to be 25% for a long, long time? There are a lot of unanswered questions, so we don't know how this is going to play out. There's so much uncertainty. And this is what also makes, by the way, if I could just segue, this also makes, jobs for not only economists very difficult, but it makes jobs for central bankers extremely difficult as well. Whether or not they're going to tighten, or they're going to hold, or they're going to cut, all things are on the table right now.
So I guess two of the themes coming out of President Trump yesterday were migration policy, immigration policy, and the tariffs. Both, some economists say, could be quite inflationary. Did you hear anything yesterday that maybe changed your thoughts of the U.S. inflation outlook?
No, just again, there was some relief, obviously during his inaugural speech when he did not mention tariffs. And but at the same time, we do know that tariffs are inflationary. It's going to be the U.S. importers that are going to be bearing the cost initially, and then they're going to probably pass it on to the consumers. In terms of the immigration and the migration, first, obviously he's going to be targeting the illegal migrants, the criminals, but in terms of broader, how much further he's going to go, it's going to have an inflationary impact because of the labor market. And we know how dependent the U.S. agricultural sector is on illegal citizens and construction as well. So we see those workers unable to work or not able to work. That could put a lot more tightness on the labor market, means higher wages, it means higher inflation.
Jennifer, thank you so much. Jennifer Lee with a brief there on tariffs with unique perspective on Canada from BMO Capital Markets. Right to it with our news in New York City. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. President Donald Trump, just hours after his inauguration, signed an order pardoning convicted January 6th rioters with 6 commutations.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon. Yes. Full pardon.
The inauguration ceremony was moved inside the U.S. Capitol due to cold weather in the very halls Trump supporters stormed on January 6, 2021. Former President Joe Biden granted blanket pardons to 5 family members in the last hour of his presidency. The final acts of clemency also included sweeping pardons from members of Congress who investigated Trump's role in the assault on the Capitol 4 years ago. Later, the now former president spoke to members of his White House staff at a send-off ceremony at Joint Base Andrews shortly after President Trump's inauguration.
You're skilled, you're passionate. The country needs you again. So all of you can, stay engaged in all the ways you can. Whether it's in public service, the private sector, philanthropy, academia, running for office yourself, or anything else you choose to do.
A second day of windy and dry conditions is forecast for Southern California, raising the risk of new wildfires. Forecasters say gusts could peak at 70 miles per hour along the coast and 100 miles per hour in the mountains and foothills. Afghanistan's Taliban government has announced the release of 2 Americans in a prisoner exchange. The Family of Ryan Corbett, one of the Americans in the exchange, said their hearts were filled with overwhelming gratitude for his release. Both CNN and the New York Times identified the second American released as William McKenty. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
So in the old days, not that long ago, Dale Hunter you hated. He skated for the Capitals.
Really?
And you hated him so much you wish he was on your team. That's how good he was. Okay. And he's a guy who came out of hockey, went up to London, Ontario in the London Knights, and he's one of these kids that, bammo, became a winning coach. This guy coached, are you ready?
Yep.
Rick Nash, Patrick Kane, and John Tavares in London to get them to the NHL.
All right.
He's been so ginormous, he's now an owner of the team.
Very good.
And this is a guy, you got
Dale Hunter.
4 million penalty minutes. And you're like, this guy's done. He's going to be selling cars. No, he's huge success. Good morning to the London Knights, London, Ontario. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
A moment at top of the hour. We're going to check in with Gary Cohn, Vice Chairman at IBM, formerly of Goldman Sachs. We get a simulcast with Bloomberg Television from Davos. That's coming up in just a moment. Looking at the futures market, S&P up about 22 points. That's 0.3%. The NASDAQ up almost 100 points. That's 0.4%. Yields coming in slightly. 10-year Treasury, 4.58%. That's in 4 basis points. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Bloomberg Surveillance, Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. Lisa Mateo on assignment somewhere south of where she'll come back tanned and rested as Paul came back tanned and rested. Right now, Bloomberg Surveillance, we're brought to you by, it's the Car Report. We're brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey. Custody solutions, no ticket charges, no conflicts of your interests. Learn more at ibkr.com/RIA. ibkr.com/RIA. Thank you, IBKR. Okay, cut to the chase. Apple, Costco, other stocks to the moon. RACE space IM. It's race Italian market. Ferrari up 29% per year in the last 8 years. Joining us, automotive correspondent, Cars You Can't Afford, with Matt Miller. Why is Ferrari the company to the moon?
Well, it's really more about margins than it is about race wins, right? I mean, they have a promising season coming up because of Lewis Hamilton joining the team, but the story is the margins. They have been able to charge
cars.
They're selling cars for astronomical prices.
Versus Aston Martin, which is selling them where Paul can slide into one.
Aston Martin doesn't have nearly the margins. They don't have nearly the valuation. Right. And I've spoken with Lawrence Stroll about this numerous times. That's what he's aiming for. He really wants a Ferrari valuation.
He wants the green guys to be like the red guys.
Yeah, and then they go from single billions to $80 billion in market cap.
This weekend, folks, and John Farrell, it's his fault. He's the one that got me into this. There was Sir Lewis, dressed wicked conservative, outside that ornate building of Ferrari in Italy. His first visit to meet the team. Describe what that means in the Matt Miller car world.
Well, for one thing, he's got to earn the respect of the Tifosi, not just
the what?
The what? Tifosi, the sea of Ferrari fans waving Italian flags
Paul,
and dressed in red.
You can say Tifosi if you have a mustache.
Right,
if you and I said Tifosi, it wouldn't work.
He's going to do that, by getting wins, getting pole positions, and then starting to build up points. Maybe not in the first season, but they'll hope that it comes back and does it in the second and third season. But the other thing is you got to dress the part for Ferrari, right? You can't just show up in a T-shirt and ripped jeans, as Lewis Hamilton is apt to do.
You have to look stylish Italian. So what are you driving these days?
Actually, right now I'm driving a GMC Yukon Denali Ultimate, and I'm absolutely in love with the vehicle because of the warmth, the fullness, and the vibrations of that 6.2-liter V8, coupled with the 10-gear transmission. You can't even feel it when you put the pedal down. It just goes. It just does exactly what you want it to, and yet it's big enough to hold my entire extended family.
EV. I mean, the president's looking at it. He took a shot at it versus European EV. Is Europe EV going to be more like American EV, questioning the economics, the veracity of it?
I don't think so. I think the Europeans are going to continue to buy EVs, or the growth there will be stronger than it is here in the U.S. We've got a bigger backlash. It's more of a political thing here. But, I find a lot of the market moves fascinating today. Tesla up in the pre-market, even after Trump said he's going to end the EV mandate. We have GM, Ford, and Stellantis all gaining in the pre-market, even after Trump said, because he didn't put the tariffs on Mexico and Canada. He threatened it. He said maybe by February 1st, but he didn't actually do it. And keep in mind, they bring a ton of cars down from north of the border. Stellantis, 40% of all the cars they make come from Canada. And you're talking about about 30% from GM, 25% from Ford. The prices, if these tariffs go into effect, will rise by about $3,000 per car, according to Wolf Research.
Matt Miller, thank you so much. Of course, host of Open Interest here, the Greifeld Hour. Matt Miller with us today on Ferrari, Sir Lewis.
He's got to find his razor.
There's a countdown, it's like 50-some days to the first race as well. Total class act. Hey, you're in front of a small audience at the Rotunda. The PA doesn't work. The band doesn't work. You do an a cappella. Carrie Underwood killed it.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, John Tucker in for Mateo. Shorebound, somewhere down south. She's smarter than we are. We welcome all of you across the nation on a frigid commute. Really, 1977 temperatures out there for a lot of people as well. Be careful out there. The ice and the cold this morning. Good morning on YouTube as well. We're going to go to Davos in a moment here. Gary Cohn, who you know from Goldman Sachs, now holding court at the International Business Machines company. IBM, I guess IBM's still big tech, right, Paul?
I think it is too. I mean, they got the king of the patents. I'll tell you that. They can rule the roost when it gets to getting
Remember
patents
when it was
every year.
I've been moved?
Yeah. I mean, but look at the stock up over the past 12 months, up 31%. So not too bad. $207 billion market cap.
You know, we'll have to see. Gary Cohn in conversation with John Farrow and Lisa Bramos. We're going to get to that in a moment. We got an equity lift to the market. Sweeney's return driving the market higher. Right now, the Bloomberg Business Flash from the Interactive Broker Studios, John Tucker.
And ahead of the cash open on Wall Street, futures indicate a higher open. Dow futures up 194. S&P futures up 22. The NASDAQ futures are 92 points higher. As far as the yield space, 2-year down 2 basis points right now. The 10-year is 5 basis points lower. That is at 457. Dollar DXY down 0.6%. Schwab reporting adjusted earnings per share for the fourth quarter that beat the average analyst estimate. Total client assets jumping 19%. Those shares were up about 5% pre-market. And 3M shares pre-market up over 4%. The company expects profit to grow this year as the CEO, Bill Brown, works to advance his plan to turn around the manufacturer. And following the dollar, you risk getting whiplash as traders guess whether the tariff threats are real or more bluster. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Well, John Tucker, thanks so much. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning, worldwide, across the nation, the tri-state area. It's brought to you by Cohn Resnick Advisory Assurance Tax. For 4 straight years, Hedge Week is named Cohn Resnick Audit Firm of the Year. Let Cohn Resnick's financial services team show you why. And we thank Cohn Resnick for heritage support of what we do. Paul, let's go back. Warner Brothers Discovery, Nathanson and Moffat.
Yeah.
Go long.
They upgrade that
just
because
it's so cheap.
I think what they're saying is there's going to be, for some of these second-tier media players, everything kind of below the Walt Disney Company, below Netflix. There's got to be some consolidation here as they try to deal with, cord cutting and the profitability or lack thereof of streaming for some of these subscale players. So maybe they need to get together. And you look at Paramount, I think what they're saying is Warner Brothers Discovery, I think they're saying, hey, there's a lot of asset value.
This happened this weekend.
Yep.
I think I was on Amazon. I don't even know what I'm on half the time.
Nope, but you're paying for it.
And there was a Paramount Plus thing on Amazon. And I assume somebody in the House is paying for that.
Yes.
But are these other smaller players using Amazon as a distribution conduit?
Yes, I use Apple Plus as my thing. So I just kind of
Like
search for anything I
Paramount
want to watch.
Plus?
Yeah,
Really?
so I kind of just said, hey, I'm looking Landman. And I said, hey, I like to watch that. And so they hooked me up and fed me to Paramount Plus. I paid them. So anyway,
Okay, we'll have
there
to
you go.
see. In Davos, Switzerland, John Farrow and Lisa Bremmer with a gentleman from IBM, Gary Cohn. Let's tune in.
We caught up in New York, how different things might be this time around. What are you hearing here in Davos, Switzerland? How different are things this time around compared to years gone by?
You know, I start out with the premise Lisa's making. I always take Davos with a grain of salt because, you know, you have lots of different opinions here. And always the start of a new year, everyone likes to be excited. Everyone likes to be balled up. We obviously went through an inauguration and change of power in the United States yesterday. We know that's fairly positive for business. On the fundamental level, it's positive for business. It's a pro-business. It's a smart regulatory environment. So everyone's thinking that's very good for business. But I think we're going to ultimately have to see what the year brings because there's still more unknowns than knowns in the equation at this point.
When you were last in the administration, the focus was on taxes first, and it spent the best part of the year trying to work out that tax bill. The following year, things shifted towards trade. There's a sense this time around that maybe we can do everything all at once. How difficult is it to do everything all at once?
Look, I'm not in Washington right now, so I don't know. I can't speak for them. But look, doing taxes by itself is going to be quite difficult. You know, there are a lot of different constituencies in Washington when it comes to doing taxes. And look, there are small margins of victories, right? Especially in the House. You know, you've got 2 or 3, today it might even be 1 or 2 seat majority in the House. And within the House, you've got certain members that want certain things to be able to vote for a tax bill. You've got certain people that are deficit hawks, so they do not want to see the deficit go up. You've got other members that want to bring back as much of the state and local tax deduction, the SALT, as we always call it, the SALT deduction. You've got other members that want to just extend everything in the Trump's tax cuts. Then you've got those that want to not only extend what's there, add all of the additional things that were talked about on the campaign trail. All of those things have a price tag associated with them. So it's $4 trillion, $5 trillion, $6 trillion. And you try and balance those with the people that don't want to have a deficit. And ultimately, something has to be worked out. And remember, the only thing that really has to change because it expires at the end of the year is the personal side of the equation. That doesn't mean they won't touch the corporate side of the equation because to make this all work, they're going to have to balance it. It's a balancing act, and there's numbers. So you're going to need revenue from certain places to be able to give it in other places.
It's a balancing act for Congress, and each congressional member has its own power just simply because of the thin margins. It is a one-man show, though, when it comes to tariffs. And are you surprised that we didn't see more aggressive tariffs implemented or at least even announced from the get-go, other than what we heard about from Mexico and Canada?
No, I'm not surprised. I think that even when I was there 8 years ago, there was always a heavy debate on tariffs, on the positives and the negatives of tariffs, on the intended consequences, the unintended consequences. You know, look, it's day one of a 4-year administration. You don't have to put tariffs on day one. I'm sure there's an enormous amount of debate going on in the White House today, as there was in the transition, on what to do with tariffs, where to put tariffs, where can tariffs be helpful, where can tariffs be hurtful. There are places, I'm sure, where there's pretty universal agreement that we should tariff. There's other places where there's probably divided opinion, and there's places where people think there should not be tariffs.
So we're here in Davos where everyone's incredibly excited about all the good and not really considering the potential inflationary component of this, the potential rate rise that could accompany this, or the potential slowdown from an increase in the price of goods at a time when spending power has been coming down. Are you trying to tell corporate executives who you meet with or others, maybe temper your enthusiasm?
No, I'm not trying to tell corporate executives anything. I think every one of us is eyes wide open. Everyone has a fairly good view of what's going on in Washington. Look, the one thing about the Trump administration is they're very transparent. And the administration is very transparent. They've had enormous access. The corporate community has access. The corporate community has been involved. The Trump administration has wanted to hear from corporate community. So no one needs to tell the corporate community to slow down. I think what people are starting to understand is what are the intended, what are the unintended consequences. As you talked about, we've seen a higher rate environment. We're talking about an environment where we may not get cuts this year. We're talking about a steeper and steeper yield curve. I think the realization that the COVID financings that were 5-year financings come due. There's a big maturity wall coming up. There's also a lot of deals in the pipeline. If you look back at the vintage years of sort of 2010 on in the venture world, the private equity world, there's been very little to no liquidity out of 2010 vintages on. There's a lot of investors, especially pensions and endowments, that are looking for a return of capital from those vintage years. There's a lot of pressure in the system to do transactions and get deals done. We all feel that. We all know that. That will be great if we can get it all done. But I think there's a realism that not all of this can get done at the same time, and we'll have to see what the market can bear. And we have all of this at the exact same time when we have very tight credit spreads and very high multiples in the market.
You've said it repeatedly. Coming into this year, there's a lot of paper that needs to be moved. There was a moment in the hearing with Scott Bessent, the incoming Treasury Secretary, where he was asked about scrapping the debt ceiling, the debt limit. And he said something, and Senator Warren didn't really let him speak, but what ultimately he was getting at was that he wanted to survey market participants. And what I sensed about where he was going was that he wanted to find out how market participants would respond to that headline. Now, you've been in both office in the administration and you've know the business, financial markets, in your time at Goldman Sachs. What would you be telling Scott Bessent about that, about how that headline would be absorbed in financial markets? And are you concerned that we could get some pushback to some of these plans?
Well, I think you will get some pushback to some of these plans. The market is getting to a point now where they're telling you we are more concerned about the debt and the deficit today than we have been in a while. And I think there's a few factors there. The debt and deficit continues to get bigger, but we're also getting closer and closer to that Social Security sort of tipping point. And they work together. We all know that the Social Security Trust Fund will be unable to fund itself in a matter of years. So it's 5, 6, 7, 4, so somewhere in there. And I think we're all confident that no one's going to cut Social Security payments. There's no member of Congress that is going to vote to cut Social Security payments, nor should they. So not only do you take the pre-existing debt that we have, the debt that we're going to continue to build by running this government, you're going to have a new source of additional debt called Social Security that you're going to have to fund. So you start putting all those things together and you look at what the government's going to need to borrow in the near future, and it's a fairly large number, and the rollovers, the quarterly rollovers, are going to start getting quite staggering. Add to that the prior administration did not really elongate the maturities on the debt. They were using a very short-dated maturity system, which I didn't understand when we had low rates. When you have low rates, you want to elongate your debt. We're going to have to deal with the problem that we never really put duration into the pre-existing debt. So we've got to roll the duration of the pre-existing debt out. We got to add to it the new debt we're going to create, and we got to be prepared for Social Security.
Do you think we can term out the debt? Just to unpack one piece of that. If we termed out the debt right now, and you're fantastic at this, we've talked about it before, front end of the curve at the moment is priced around Fed funds on 2s. The curve is, 40, 50 basis points steep, maybe 40, something like that, the last time I checked. Historically, that's not that much. I mean, I don't think there's any real sign that we're freaking out about the fiscal deficit yet. That's before you even do all of these things you've talked about.
We're not. Look, I think it's a good opportunity to term out debt. We've got as you said, a 40-point inverted yield curve. Historically, we've got a positively shaped yield curve. We still need to continue to elongate our maturities in the United States.
You think we have the space to do that right now? Because I think it's about 40 basis points steeper, 2s versus 10s. Do you think we have the space to do it still?
Yeah, it's steep.
Yeah,
it's steep. You're right. We do need to do it at 40 basis points. I still think it's the right place to go.
Your message to the people that didn't live a steep yield curve and think that right now at the moment, like, this might be it. What's your message to them? My message is go back and look at history. If you go back and look at history, the 100-year, 10-year rate average in the United States is over 4%. And if you look at the steepness of the yield curve over the 100 years, we've always had 100, 150 basis points of steepness in the curve. If you look at Fed funds out. So we are still at a relatively flat curve. Gary, appreciate your time. Always sharp. It's good to catch up. Thank you, sir.
John Farrow and Lisa Bramwitz in conversation, always and forever with a gentleman. from Goldman Sachs. I mean, he goes to IBM, and I guess he's expert on AI now.
Right.
But as John was doing there, you talk about debt defeasance and extending duration.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're talking about the steepness of the yield curve. It is a little bit steeper. We had inversion for such a long period of time, so now we have a little bit of steepness.
President Trump didn't mention it yesterday.
No, I don't think so. No.
Well, we'll turn to, and this is I've really been looking forward to this. With too short a visit this morning, Wendy Schiller joins us right now at Brown University on the inauguration. Wendy, I thought George Will did a very good job in the Washington Post of going back to Lincoln One, the definitive 1965 speech, and others along the way, including John Fitzgerald at Kennedy in 1960. Where has the grace gone? Where has the dignity gone?
Well, I mean, I don't want to sort of say that President Trump was not graceful or dignified in his inaugural speech yesterday, his second inaugural speech. You see the real difference between the teleprompter speech that he read, and he tends to be flatter on a teleprompter than he is when he can go off the cuff.
Sure.
But it was a fairly typical, I think, Republican presidential speech, laying out priorities that are in line with the Republican Party. And I thought the whole process inside the Capitol was actually quite dignified. I think it looked like many other inaugurations, except that it was inside, and all the other presidents were sitting there that are alive. Not all of their spouses came, as we can talk about, but nonetheless, if the world's watching about the transition of power, I think that yesterday was a showcase of the transition of power. The other speech he gave and the other sort of ongoings in the Capitol Arena, that was sort of like a campaign rally and a celebration. And, we can discuss that. But the ceremony, I think, was in line with prior ceremonies. And the agenda, strengthen the economy, reduce inflation. The agenda has some parts, I think, of former presidential agendas from the Republican Party.
Wendy, as it relates to some of these executive orders around immigration, deportation, how are you thinking about that? How practical are some of the more robust plans from President Trump?
Well, the person who's in charge, Homan, said we're going to start with what we can do. And what we can do is people who have been arrested, there's a record of that. And if they're undocumented, they can match that. And that's who they're going to try to deport first. Depending on their success rate there, right. And he said specifically, President Trump, on gangs, if they can get enough done there, they may back off raiding factories, for example. Because, of course, if you remove workers from their workforce who are undocumented, right. You have to replace them, and that means higher wages and inflation. Wendy, so it's a hard thing to pull off.
Wendy, last night in Vermont, above Cabot Creamery, where they make all that wonderful cheese, on the distance between Derby and Newport, way up. They almost speak French up there. A Border Patrol guy was murdered on the highway. They showed the video in the middle of nowhere. Is there any other issue in America except the linkage of crime to immigration? Is that the singular issue for this president?
Well, not only, I don't know if it's a singular issue, but certainly even for Congress, right? So the Congress just passed the immigration bill, Lincoln Riley bill, that's named after a woman who was murdered by someone who was undocumented, who had been arrested and released. So, this was something in the first Trump administration, too. So I feel like this is a really important connection for the Republicans to make. We know that the vast majority of immigrants in the country are law-abiding people, and the vast majority of undocumented are law-abiding people. But nonetheless, we have these horrible incidents, and that is the fodder and the energy that they are using to close the border. And you can argue this is a time when the trifecta Republicans can pass immigration reform. Pass immigration reform. Get tough on the border for people who are not documented, but expand the number of visas for people who want to come here in the documented process. And that's what the big debate will be. But there isn't any excuse for the Republican Party now. It's a trifecta. They can do immigration reform.
Wendy, thank you so much. Nice way of wrapping it up. Professor Schiller with Taubman Center at International Relations at Brown University this morning. Futures up 24. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul. John, hours after he was officially sworn in again as president, Donald Trump signed dozens of executive orders in the Oval Office, many of which he'd promised while campaigning. Many orders targeted migrants, including denying the constitutional right of birthright citizenship to children of undocumented immigrants or temporary visa holders.
This next order relates to the definition of birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment of the United States.
Yeah, that's a good one. Birthright. That's a big one.
What about that one in the court? That one is likely to be challenged.
Could be. We think we have good grounds.
Others included pardons for supporters who attacked the Capitol on January 6th. The president also withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord. Trump is pulling the U.S. out of the World Health Organization, rescinded diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and recognition of transgender identity. World reaction to the start of this second Trump presidency has been swift. Pope Francis has said President Trump's plans to deport migrants from the U.S. would be a disgrace if enacted. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen says Europe remains committed to the Paris Climate Agreement, which she called the best hope for all humanity. And the WHO says it hopes President Trump will reconsider his decision to pull the U.S. out of the UN agency. Second day of windy and dry conditions is forecast for Southern California, raising the risk of new wildfires. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris arrived in Southern California last night after attending the presidential inauguration in Washington. The now former VP and her husband visited the site of the Eaton fire in Los Angeles, not far from their home that survived the Palisades fire.
We're all in this together. They're not alone. And Los Angeles is going to continue to be what Los Angeles is, a place that is strong and knows how to rebuild.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. And now for your tourism report. Aruba. Tourism is expected to grow 14% last year, 53% higher than pre-COVID.
Wow.
How is the boom in the Caribbean, Paul? Is it American tourists packing hotels, or is it something different?
Down in Aruba, we were down there last week, and it is a part of the Netherlands, so there's a big Dutch influence. So 4 or 5 or 6 787s from Amsterdam come in every single day.
KLM is bringing in the planes.
But again, every other plane was New York, Boston, it seemed like. So big East Coast, as you would expect in the Caribbean. But again, the restaurants were packed, the town was packed, the hotels are packed. We checked in, and then they said we are absolutely full this entire week.
Yeah, we got to come back to this. Very interesting. Sweeney, tanned and rested from New York. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. We are being brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses, Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. This is for new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment. The offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. Let me start with U.S.-listed Chinese stocks like Alibaba. They're rising as President Trump held back from announcing any tariffs on Chinese goods on the first day in office. 3M reported fourth quarter results roughly in line with expectations. The company does expect profit to grow this year. This is all part of their turnaround plan. Adjusted earnings this year should be in a range from $7.60 to $7.90 a share. Charles Schwab, fourth quarter revenue growing by 20% year over year to $5.3 billion. They continue to attract record new inflows into the retail brokerage. The shares were up over 5%. NVIDIA stock rising alongside rival chip makers. NVIDIA shares right now up about 0.8%. President Trump rescinding almost 80 executive orders signed by Joe Biden, including one from October 2023 aimed at limiting AI risks. Bitcoin, real quick, right now up 2%, 104,000 plus per token. Crypto policy directives, though, they were surprisingly omitted from the president's day one orders. And ahead of the cash open on Wall Street, Dow futures right now, they are up 162 points. S&P futures up 22. The NASDAQ futures up 101 points. Two-year yield down 2 basis points, 426. The 10-year down 5 basis points. That's at 457. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. And that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, John Tucker. Appreciate it. With Andromeda Capital Management, a timely interview for Global Wall Street on the ability, particularly of Europe, to move forward. Alberto Gallo, CIO at Andromeda, joins us right now. Alberto, here in January, after the political debris of Europe, is it an opportunity for Andromeda? Do you come in feeling like there's money to be made on fixed income globally and particularly in Europe?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. We're definitely excited because with the new U.S. administration, we are going to have a lot more winners and losers in the market. Who are the winners? Well, there's some immediate positives. One of them is there's going to be a lower geopolitical risk, probably a peace agreement, a ceasefire agreement in Ukraine. And that's a big boost for Ukraine itself and also for some European sectors that benefit from a reconstruction. So infrastructure, for example. And then there's going to be losers. For example, we think the deficit will stay elevated. We think that at least at the beginning will be hard to cut federal jobs. And so we're looking at a persistent inflation environment with, the Treasury 10-year yields and also investment grade yields and spreads generally in the market being very tight right now.
Do you want
it's an exciting environment.
I thought I'd hear that. It sounds like it, to say the least. But in credit, do you want to buy a better quality credit looking to make a gain from, say, 75 to 85, or do you go garbage shopping, which, you're acclaimed for? Do you buy something at 22, trying to do a double to 42? Do you want to buy quality or lesser?
So, Tom, actually, right now, there's very little that's at distress levels. And the high quality, the investment grade credits are all above par. So we don't really like to go into investment grade when spreads are near record lows. For example, the U.S. investment grade index of CDS, of credit default swaps, it's below 50 basis points.
Right.
So only 0.5% extra spread. And the lowest it has ever been, it's 45 basis points. We're just 2-3 bips from the record lows. And we also see very crowded positioning on U.S. investment grade, on U.S. high yield as well. So what we like as a long is to have things that have a catalyst that are so-called special situations, so companies that are being acquired or governments that are improving.
I mean, this is important.
Very selective
Paul. Just breaking right now is the French piece. Alice Gledhill reporting this for Bloomberg. France's first, they call them oats, O-A-T. And there was a huge demand for the oat as a summary for our American audience. Everybody wants to buy the Macron Republic this morning.
Exactly. Alberto, so we just got through an inauguration of a United States president, and from an economic perspective, there seems to be a sense of animal spirits out there, a real sense of optimism for what can happen in this administration from an economic perspective, whether it be lower taxes, lighter regulation, maybe more pro-growth policies. Do you share in that optimism?
I think we do. And however, we need to also think about what is priced into the market. So for sure, we have a situation where there was an economic pause of several months during which the Fed did an emergency cut. And, businesses were not investing, they were not hiring. Everyone was waiting for the election results since the end of last year. So now the first thing that happens is this pause is over. You know where things stand, you can take decisions, and businesses are hiring again. The job market is in good shape. There's reinvestment in infrastructure, domestic reinvestment. Tariffs are bringing capital back to the U.S. So U.S. exceptionalism is continuing, but it's also very well priced. I think the idea that the Trump administration can boost growth to 3% and also cut the deficit to 3% is something very optimistic. So I think we're still going to have an elevated deficit. And part of that spending will also come from tariffs, so capital that gets acquired from outside the U.S. and spent in the U.S. But it means that inflation will be persistent. So you want to own risk assets. You don't want to own risk-free assets. You don't want to own treasuries. You don't want to own duration. And the other assumption that I would challenge is there's a lot of pessimism on Europe. Everyone has been calling the death of the European Union. I think that, Europe, Trump is a positive for Europe. I think that there are some governments that already got their act together. They're closer to the Trump administration, like, the Prime Minister of Italy was the only one invited to the inauguration. But, even in France and in Germany, they are realizing that you need to invest in infrastructure, you need to be able to be self-sufficient on defense. So in the end, it is a positive, and there are sectors in Europe that are extremely cheap and interesting to buy, especially on the credit side. So we don't like risk-free assets. We don't like the market as a whole where it is now. It's very well priced, but there's a lot of interesting alpha opportunities around, some in emerging markets, some in Europe, and we've definitely started the year with the right move. There's been some volatility in interest rates, in FX, and also in credit. And it's shaping up to be a very interesting year, more than the last 2 years.
Alberto, you mentioned emerging markets. Does that include China? Because for a lot of folks, they just can't really get their head around where to go for China.
So in emerging market equities, China's a big weight. In emerging market bonds and credit, China's property firms, most of them restructured. So now it's a relatively small weight. We still don't buy China risk. It's very idiosyncratic, very specific. We don't have exposure, but there is a lot of the world which is China linked. So if you believe that China will have a better than expected stimulus, and at the moment the stimulus is essentially an extension of the status quo. It's not a massive plan to revamp the economy. It's downside management essentially. But if you believe it's going to be stronger, then there's other areas of the world that have upside. I would say that, again, in the credit market as a whole, things are relatively tight. Credit spreads are tight, like they are for U.S. high yield, also for emerging markets. There are some areas of the equity market which have sensitivity to China. And again, in the European space, they have room to run.
I got 1 minute. Is there opportunity in Italy? I mean, I'm looking at the Ferrari piece here out 5 years, and it's gone 103 down to 101. It yields under 4%. What's that about? Where's the Alberto Gallo opportunity in Italy besides 3,000 square feet in Venice?
Tom, you got to drive a Ferrari, but you don't want to buy Ferrari bonds. You want to buy Aston Martin bonds. You need to buy bonds of companies that are more on the edge, that will pay you more for financing. So in Italy, I would say credit spreads are really tight. The sovereign debt, BTPs, is tight. But the opportunity is in companies that are a little bit more higher yielding. And I would say for the first time in a long time, we have the Southern European countries which are doing better. They have a weak euro. They have more tourism, more inflows. of foreign capital, and also they have been fixing their act a lot earlier than Germany and France, their business model. So Spain, Italy, Portugal, Greece, there's pretty good opportunities there, better than core Europe, and actually better than the UK, where things are still, the government's still struggling to attract investment.
Have you ever heard him this optimistic?
No.
It's a new Alberto Gallo.
Exactly.
Alberto, thank you so much. I just love it. With Andromeda, we'll get him on much more here in a fractious 2025. Alberto Gallo with some enthusiasm there for Europe. We shall see. We need to do a data check. Paul, on the screen, what are you looking at?
Well, I'm looking at the euro for you. I'm planning out your next trip to Paris or
Got that
Milan
right.
or Rome. 1.0372 on dollar euro.
I'm booking for next Christmas this week.
Really?
That's how stupid it is. We'll have to see.
Yep.
Stay with us. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stock futures higher ahead of the pre-market open. Charles Schwab, D.R. Horton shares rising pre-market trading better than expected results. Schwab rising about 5%, posting results that exceeded estimates. The company continues to attract new record inflows into the retail brokerage business. Treasury yields lower right now. Fears that Trump's policies are going to fuel inflation easing after Donald Trump didn't impose China-specific tariffs, at least not for now. U.S.-listed Chinese shares like Alibaba getting a boost. Alibaba shares are up 1.6%. Apple's iPhone sales plunging 18% in China during the December quarter. This according to Counterpoint Research. Those are among the most actively traded. They were down about 1.8%. Walgreens tumbling 5%. The Department of Justice suing the company for allegedly dispensing opioids and other controlled substances at pharmacies across the U.S. while ignoring red flags that the prescriptions were likely illegal. Dow futures up 166 points. S&P E-mini futures up 23. The NASDAQ futures up 104 points. 2-year down 3 basis points, 425. The 10 down 7 basis points right now, 455. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Bloomberg surveillance this morning across the nation and worldwide. Brought to you by IBKR. Will the average U.S. temperature in January be greater than 34 degrees? You can trade your prediction at Interactive Brokers by yes if you agree, no if you don't. Correct answers earn $1. Go to ibkr.com/forecast. You can bet the temperature.
Where did that come from?
Well, that's great.
You
It's
can
a
bet
big deal.
anything these days.
Weather, it's about anything.
Yep.
You know, for Global Wall Street, and frankly for all, this is the conversation of the day, and maybe the year. Michael Kushma's got some experience. Princeton University, wandered by LSE in the heyday of Lionel Robbins economics, dropped by Columbia University to see a young Ned Phelps years ago. He is grizzled and experienced. You mentioned that colleges are struggling with the alternative investment. Your Princeton struggled last year in total return. I'll just cut to the chase, Michael. When does the alternative game end?
It's when the bull market ends. I think that it's people are going to fade it for now, but it may come back when this bull market ends. But remember, I think a lot of this stuff started in the previous decade when equity market returns were desultory, global financial crisis, bond yields were at 1-2%. How are you going to make money in public markets and add more to alternatives? And that was just as the bull market turned,
right,
and became entrenched. So it's I think that it's I think it may be too late to say sell alternatives and buy public markets, but clearly increased allocations to it, except in private credit. That's possible. Yep. That could change.
I mean, Paul, you're living this. I mean, different schools are living this. It's not like 5 or 10%. You know, an emerging market. It's big double digit, right?
Yeah. I mean, and this is the Yale model, what they call it, Tom. The Yale model, I've been told, have the. It's not just stocks.
It's more than the Ohio State model works.
Yeah, exactly right. Michael, in the world of fixed income here, where's the risk reward for you these days? We've got a new president in the White House. We've got a new Congress that's been seated, maybe a change in some economic policies. Where's the risk reward for you guys?
The risk reward is skewed to continued strong growth, higher or stable, I want to say higher inflation, but inflation rate that's unwilling to come down towards the Fed's target. And this is true globally, I think, too. Inflation rates are struggling to get to that target. They bounce around, but they're sort of stuck. And you think about it, the U.S. economy growing, 3% per year, give or take a little bit. Unemployment rate stable. It looks like we have full employment. I'm not sure how much extra stimulus the economy can take without pushing inflation higher. So I think for the past, we've seen that in the fourth quarter of last year, we had the worst bond market returns in years in Q4 because suddenly they came out, there may be a no landing scenario where the Fed actually maybe doesn't cut rates at all anymore, and we're talking about rate hikes in 26. because the economy is refusing to slow down to acceptable levels from an inflation perspective. But on the other hand, enough global uncertainty about trade policy, geopolitics, high asset prices could foster a downturn in spending. I suppose equity market had a 20% correction. Consumer spending, which is led by higher income people, led by asset gains, suppose that goes back down again and consumer spending shifts downward. So I think we are at this sort of, not inflection point, higher or lower, an inflection where we stay strong and the Fed is sort of sidelined, or things could get weaker if policy becomes too uncertain.
Well, we got a new administration coming and talking about pro-growth policies, yet there's also a lot of talk about tariffs, a lot of talk of getting tough with our big trade partners, Canada and the U.S. So there's a lot of cross currents out there.
There absolutely are. Tariffs are tax increases. They're consumption taxes. And history of the previous tariff increases in the previous Trump administration, where most of it got passed on to consumers. It was a tax on consumer spending. And maybe raising some revenue for the U.S. government is not a bad thing, but if they're just planning on spending it on other things, that's not necessarily such a good thing.
25 Cabot Square. And you guys, I believe you've recommitted to Canary Wharf in London. You've lived it. You've owned it. We just talked to Alberto Gallo, shockingly optimistic on trying to find value in Europe. Everybody's fixated on Apple's earnings. What should we fixate on your Europe?
It's interesting about Europe. So Southern Europe is doing really well. In fact, think of this conundrum or contradiction. Political stability in Southern Europe is a strength versus what's going on in Northern Europe, where you got political disagreements across the board. But Italian politics and Greek politics are pretty stable right now. It's a strength they have, and a service-based economy, which is a strength. And so that those economies are rolling along. But Northern Europe, stuck.
Too quickly, I got to get this in. You're on the phone with Princeton endowment people. What's your advice to them on alternatives? Lighten up or stay the?
I would stay the course for now, as potentially the M&A market opens up again with interest rates sort of stable. The idea of Trump coming into power,
you're going to get an M&A to liquidize,
liquidize all these investments who've been stuck, not generating any cash flow, any return of capital to be reinvested anywhere else. I think that they give it a chance to see if it finally happens in the next 2 years. I
assume that includes the Boston Red Sox. Michael Kushma, thank you so much. CIO Fixed Income at Morgan Stanley, decades at 25 Cabot Square in London. Right now to the news with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, John. President Trump wasted little time working to fulfill his campaign pledges with a flurry of day one executive orders. They include withdrawing the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord and the World Health Organization, declaring an emergency at the southern border, and pardoning more than 1,500 people who attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Trump was asked about the pardons.
Should there be punishment for the people who assaulted law enforcement officers that day?
Well, I will say this. They've been in jail for a long time already. I see murderers in this country get 2 years, 1 year, and maybe no time. So they've already been in jail for a long time. These people have been destroyed.
Family members of injured police are expressing outrage. The brother of one of the officers who died after a confrontation with the mob called the pardons a betrayal of decency. Wendy Schiller is director of the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University. Says the new president sent a message.
I'm going to do what I'm going to do as an executive, as the president of the United States. And I don't need Congress. I don't need the Supreme Court. I am going to exercise the power, unitarily. There's a whole theory about the unitary president.
Wendy Schiller of Brown University, a guest on Bloomberg Daybreak. The Taliban government in Afghanistan said today it released American citizens in a prisoner exchange for an Afghan jailed in a U.S. prison. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. While you were gone, Paul Sweeney, I watched the final episode of Silo.
Wow.
On Apple TV, as Tim Cook sat down with the lead actress and said, we're doing season 3 and season 4. Is streaming working now? Are people watching more and more?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it
Absolutely.
It's continuing to
Yeah. And the way
silo
you see
numbers.
it, you see it from the subscriber numbers from the various streamers, but you also see it from the other side of the equation. The cord cutting continues for the cable
Moffett
operators.
Nathanson, Rich Greenfield had
Rich
that as
Greenfield
well,
out
yeah.
with some great research, just continuing to follow that story there. So yeah, it's happening, and it's not slowing down. It's accelerating, if anything else, as more and more
Unbelievable.
content goes to streaming.
We're going to touch upon that. It's just affecting all of our lives. I'm amazed at home, folks, how no one watches traditional TV. Just absolutely amazing. Futures reach out, up 29 right now. From New York City, Bloomberg surveillance. Good morning.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, we're talking to the markets here, Tom. We had some green on the screen here in the futures market. You know where the growth is, Tom? Is ETFs. It has been one of the biggest growth stories I've seen in financial services. It's made
and
a
the fees
star.
are less.
Oh,
you
my
tell
goodness.
me how Boston,
I
the
have
Boston
no
you and
idea.
I knew from another time and place, how do they move forward?
No, I have no idea. Tom and I grew up in a world where the mutual funds up in Boston were the be-all, end-all, and it was a great business for them. But now the new wrapper for asset management is the ETFs. Lower cost, better transparency, and that's where the funds are going. Talk to us a little bit about that today. Is Emily Graffeo, cross-asset reporter for Bloomberg News, joining us here in our studio. Emily, talk to us about, it used to be, I'm just thinking, talk to Eric Balchunas of Bloomberg Intelligence. It's just the big guy, the State Streets, and so on, getting into this business. But now everybody's getting into it. What have you been reporting?
So all parts of the, I guess what we could call the ETF supply chain are now getting into the space. So Raymond James Investment Management, this is the asset management arm of Raymond James Financial, which has a network of over 8,000 financial advisors.
Yep.
They filed for ETFs last week. This is, a body of financial advisors that typically buy the ETFs from, or they sell the ETFs from BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard to their clients.
They're going to do their ows. They brought most sparks down for the New York Stock Exchange,
Yes.
right? So, obviously they're like lemmings off a cliff. We're going to see this. Is the main reason this is expanding away from Bitcoin and the Forpal Levered Graffeo Fund, is the main reason this is working as tax strategy is clients can control their tax advantage versus traditional mutual funds?
Yeah, it's more tax efficient, typically lower cost, and that's why we're seeing.
Oh, to me, this is a huge deal.
Yep.
$575 billion in outflows from mutual funds in 2024, over $1 trillion in inflows to ETFs. So it's better for the investor.
$500 billion walked out of traditional funds.
Yep.
And the asset managers themselves are looking at this and they're saying, well, why would I keep launching mutual funds if the money is going to ETFs? So we're seeing also Lazard was another entrant last week.
What is the feeling in the marketplace about the future of traditional mutual funds? I mean, I think most of us in our 401ks have the mutual funds there, but again, $1 trillion going into ETFs, $500 billion coming out of mutual funds. That's all you need to know, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the 401k is a good point because that's kind of the one space that the mutual fund assets still seem relatively sticky because the tech is not really there to put ETFs into 401ks. We did have State Street on Bloomberg TV a couple months ago telling Katy Greifeld that they're exploring how to fit ETFs into 401ks. But so far, that space, the retirement space, the tax-advantaged funds, you can already, you don't really need the tax efficiency of an ETF.
I got a minute left. I mean, in the frigid cold here, February 11, the Duke Blue Devils wander by Charlottesville to play the Cavs of Virginia.
Could be ugly.
It could be ugly. I mean,
yeah.
This is where Duke
I'm not putting money on this.
No, Duke lets their guard down because Virginia's
well, here's
not making it, not having it.
Well, here's what's going on in my Duke chat with all my Duke friends is what has happened to the ACC. Duke is the only ACC team in the top 25. It used to be we'd have 5 or 6 teams, and we think, Tom, that is some of these ACC schools have been very slow to play the NIL game, name, image, and likeness, have been very slow to play the portal game. And so all these kids are going to the SEC and the Big 12, and people like Virginia, North Carolina.
When Emily was there, she had nil.
Oh, I
mean,
know.
She didn't even have to show up to work.
She was on the dancing team.
But what's nil, like where people make money?
Yeah, real money. Name,
image, likeness. So an athlete makes an Instagram post.
Like
and
how much do they make?
Millions.
Really?
I don't know.
Yes. Cooper Flag.
Okay,
millions.
but somebody, a regular slug at UVA, they're making
tens of
40,
thousands.
50, 100,000.
I don't know. When I was a student, we didn't have NIL, so I'm not exactly sure. So I missed that.
NIL
the
free
UVA
today.
report.
Thank you for the ETF report and the NIL report as well. In honor of the president, Brooks and Dunn.
Full of sinners and believers. Learn that happiness on earth
third row.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Mateo on assignment, someplace warmer. John Tucker with us this morning, which is a good thing. How is the frigid air coming in off the Atlantic Ocean?
I'm still waiting for the water outside to freeze, and we're not at that point
Is
yet.
that the Gulf Stream effect?
No, it would be the bay where all the ferries go back and forth to the Isle of Manhattan.
Does that freeze?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Sandy Hook Bay, where I am, that in the past is frozen solid.
Oh, really?
Oh, I thought that was
impassable. It's
A mix, okay.
a mix.
Oh,
so.
okay. I was just at Sandy Hook yesterday.
Dumb question. Did the East River or the Hudson River freeze over?
They used to.
They used to.
If you take a trip up the Hudson to the Roosevelt Estate, they
Yes.
have a big barn there. It's sort of underground where they used to keep the ice for the summer. They put hay on it.
That they took out in the winter.
They took out in the winter and bring it up
He's
there.
a font of wisdom. It's
None of which you can use, but I mean,
he was from one of the original Dutch families.
Yep, I know.
I don't know which one. I can't pronounce them, but
Yep, something
maybe
about that.
Stuyvesant. Who knows that? I know Stuyvesant went up 3rd Avenue. I didn't know that.
Really?
Yeah. Russell Shorto has a definitive book on this. It was my book of the year. 1 volume on New York City, the John Tucker story. And Russell Shorto, it's a fabulous book all about the Dutch. And the Stuyvesant farm was up 3rd Avenue.
Okay.
Like that was there, like with Bloomingdale Road, which became Broadway. I mean, Lori Calvasina's looking at me like, what is this, the History Channel?
all we're talking about is the traffic on 3rd Avenue today.
We welcome all of you across the nation this morning on your commute and at your office and at your home, YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Again, major shout out. I just put it on Twitter. Nigel Farage, a 31-minute conversation with a gentleman from the United Kingdom. Look for that. Really important interview that was done over the weekend. From the Interactive Broker Studios, the Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
Okay, guys. Ahead of the first day of trading under the second Trump administration futures, they are higher right now. No immediate action on raising tariffs. That kind of alleviates immediate concerns about the threats of double-digit tariffs on all imports and a jump in the rate of inflation. 3M climbing close to 4%. The industrial and consumer products maker beating Wall Street fourth quarter sales and profit targets, issuing strong sales guidance for the coming year as well. D.R. Horton shares rising over 4% pre-market trading after the home builder reported earnings per share for the first quarter. They beat the average analyst estimate. They also reported the number of homes closed in the quarter that topped estimates. Charles Schwab rising about 5%, posting results exceeding estimates. The company continues to attract record new inflows. Apple falling about 2% pre-market as sales of iPhones. They dived over 18% in China during the December quarter. That's according to some independent research. Goldman Sachs planning to tap new global leaders for its equities, fixed income, and banking units. It also plans to name new co-heads of the international unit. The promotions cap more than a year of deliberation inside Goldman over how to designate the firm's next generation of leaders. Dow futures up 194, S&P E-mini futures up 32, the NASDAQ futures up 138. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Got to do this quickly here. I came in this morning and I went to two sources, Amory Horton, and I went to Hani Shaw, who runs all of our schedules with Washington, and there was no schedule for the president.
No.
Like the morning after, sleep in, get up, probably have a mimosa, whatever, for the White House mimosa, I should say. We now have a sort of kind of like schedule. This is Punch Bowl. There's no official schedule right now. but they believe the president will meet with Speaker Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune of the Dakotas. They're suggesting a full GOP leadership meeting, but they don't know where. This will be 3-ish. And at 4 o'clock, Caroline Leavitt told Fox News the president will hold a newser on infrastructure at 4 p.m. today. Maybe. All of this is not an official release.
Because usually we do get an official release from the White House to the press corps. This is what the president's schedule is.
In addition, Amory Horton suggests that Mr. Trump may attend a national prayer service at the cathedral where we saw the funeral of the president.
Which I've never been to. I need to get to that national cathedral.
Get to it. It's worth attending, and there's a whole huge heritage there of the American and the ecumenical tradition. Our ecumenical tradition is to get as long a conversation as we can with Lori Calvasina. She read Graham Dodd and Cottle on the lawn at the University of Virginia ages ago. Is security analysis dead? Has everybody turned into a strategist?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who try to do my job for me. So to some extent. But look, I think we are in sort of a more macro-driven world at this point in time, and I think this is going to be very much a year where the top-down tailwinds are informing a lot of decisions.
So from where you are, is it an active management stock selection year, particularly in your expertise of mid-cap or small cap, or is it an index year?
Well, I'll tell you what's fascinating, Tom, and often you will see funds flows turn in January, but we actually saw back in December, we started to see some inflows to actively managed funds in both small cap and large cap U.S. equity funds emerge. Now, that has occurred alongside passive outflows, and that hasn't sort of taken you into negative territory in large cap. You have seen overall negative flows in small cap, but it's really, really interesting to see that divergence. So far, the people who buy funds seem to be betting more on the stock pickers right now.
We had the inauguration yesterday. Did you guys change your outlook for risk assets for stocks based upon this new administration, a new Congress being seated? A lot of people feel like animal spirits on the economic front, maybe you're being loosened a little bit.
Yeah, I think what we did when we put our year ahead outlook together, and we did this around Thanksgiving, so we already knew the outcome. Yep. And we had been sort of updating our models heading into that well ahead of the November election. But what we did do with one of our sort of 5 sets of back tests, we were able to more discreetly model in the political environment. So our political back test actually, I think it's like around an 11 to 12% type annual return we added into the targeting mix. But that's the return you typically see when Republicans run the White House, the Senate, and the House. And so we thought that sort of did a good job of capturing the idea of a better animal spirit environment, better vibes, and a more kind of business-friendly climate.
So how do we think about it for 2025? One of the areas that I feel like there might be a risk to the market is maybe even more dependent than usual on earnings. Earnings really need to come through because I don't think the Fed's going to do a whole lot for us in 2025. What's your concern or confidence in the earnings outlook?
Well, so look, I've been lucky. The rate strategist that I work with has been calling for an early end to the cutting cycle for about 6 months now. And so he did finally just pull out the January cut, but the January cut was the only one he had in this year for quite some time. So what that translated to for us is in our valuation model. So this is another one of the 5 things that goes into our target mix as we come up with a target PE and look at that in the context of our earnings forecast and then get a fair value for the S&P. So bottom line, because of his Fed view, he also was pretty aggressive on the 10-year yield. We haven't really had any multiple expansion baked into our outlook, and I think that's the right answer.
We got to interrupt. Lori Calvasina with us, folks, with RBC. Thrilled she's here today, an extended conversation. Paul, you're going mental here about Djokovic did what in Australia?
Beat Carlos Alcaraz. I mean, so for me, Carlos Alcaraz is one of the top-ranked players, and he's like, I don't know, 10, 12 years younger, maybe more than that. So it's a good win for Djokovic.
Federer's retired, right?
Yes.
He's like history.
Yeah. This is the frustrating thing about the Australian Open. It's a Grand Slam. And I don't think I'll see a match because it's, they're on the opposite side of the globe. But anyway.
I just follow Emma. When she loses, I turn away. So, she lost like the third round.
Well, Molly Smith, our, Bloomberg News editor, she is our go-to tennis correspondent. So she knows.
Really?
Everything. She stays up and watches this stuff.
I can't. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney with more tennis.
That's right. We'll have tennis coming up.
Futures up 29. Is a mid-cap still a mid-cap, Lori Calvasina? I got off the Vanguard platform. Palantir, Amphenol, Welltower, Motorola, Constellation. In a bull market, if those market caps go up, do the mid-cappies become more large cappies?
I think so. And look, I've covered small and mid-cap stocks for a long time. What's always been apparent to me is that mid-cap managers don't really live and die by their benchmarks the way that, say, small-cap managers do or large-cap managers do. They tend to be sort of benchmark aware, but don't really get caught up in these same market cap bands as
So
other
how do you
folks.
buy mid-caps? I mean, you're a strategist. I get that.
Yeah.
I don't want to ask you individual stocks. But then, are you looking at free cash flow? Is it revenue growth? What's the game for you?
I tend to not look at free cash flow just because I find databases don't do a good job of allowing me to model. It's very lumpy data. The forecasts are very, kind of messy. PMs love to look at it, right? It's something they live and die by, but as a macro person, it doesn't really work. I think we tend to define it in terms of market cap. I think if you want to go from like maybe 10 up to 50, that's a pretty safe, kind of range that I think most people can live in. But some people will tell you it starts a little lower, and a lot of people will let those names ride, right, and take them a bit higher.
Leadership in a market, Lori, it just seems like as long as we can remember, it's been technology driving these markets higher. Do you believe in market leadership? And if so, do we have tech still as the leader in this market?
Well, look, I'll tell you, Paul, I've been in the broadening camp, but I would say, by a centimeter, not by a mile. I do think this broadening thesis has become one of the most consensus things strategists have talked about coming into this year.
Are you observing it?
I mean, you can see it to some extent, right? But every time I have a weekly, and every time I update my charts, right? Like one week I'm saying growth is fighting back, and then another week I'm saying the value finally looks like it's trying to assert itself. So it's been very, very choppy. And I think there are good reasons to rotate. I think you've got valuation problems in the mega cap growth names. I think you've got crowding problems, and I think you've got decelerating earnings growth. And I think there is an itch in this market among PMs to rotate. But relative PEs of Mag 7 versus rest of market is a function. It's really tracking very closely relative long-term earnings growth dynamics. And Mag 7 earnings growth keeps surprising to the upside. So I keep telling people, that the case for the rotation, it's there, but it feels like the rest of the market is just whiffing on its opportunity and just can't reclaim that earnings leadership.
What are some of the sectors that screen well for you guys these days going into 25?
I think financial still has some room.
Okay.
I don't think it has as much room as it did. I think the capital markets names are getting expensive, but the banks, insurance companies still look pretty good on valuation, have good earnings revision trends. And I think financials in general, you've got a lot of policy tailwinds.
Right.
You don't really have any headwinds. Services looks really good. So you've got a lot of big tech type names in there. They're more consumer oriented. Again, I think more policy tailwinds than headwinds, good valuations, good revisions. We upgraded that one back in December and got a lot of good feedback from investors.
So, and this is great with Lori Calvasina, folks, because she's from a distance on Mag 7. How do you perceive Mag 7 when I see Delta Airlines, surprise, Schwab today, surprise? Why aren't I going to get surprises from Mag 7 and everybody goes on their concentrated portfolio way?
What I've been seeing with the Mag 7, if I look back over the past years, we'll kind of go into earnings, right? And the banks come in and they have good numbers, and then you'll get some of these other cyclical kind of overlooked parts of the market working. And then you might have like one of these Mag 7 names kind of stumble a little bit, and it feels like in the middle of that reporting season, you're seeing the leadership shift and the earnings dynamic shift. And then I feel like all the worker bees around Wall Street go back after reporting season winds down. They go to conferences, they've had all their callbacks, they go, on their bus tours and things. And suddenly I notice the Mag 7 numbers start coming up again. And so it feels like in the moment, there's a reaction to fade it, but when people really start to give it some serious thought and reflect, the strength comes back. It's a really, really odd dynamic, to be fair.
Tom and I have been talking a lot about ETFs. How does that impact your world as a strategist? Like when I was on the sell side, it was mutual funds and hedge funds.
Yeah.
Those are my clients. Do I now go see ETF managers? Do you go see ETF managers?
I don't see ETF managers per se, but a lot of my hedge funds will use ETFs or ETF-like instruments. And then if you think about sort of not so much the actively managed funds, occasionally maybe they might, buy something like a biotech ETF to put cash in, or a small cap manager might buy an IWM, type instrument to put cash in. That's very rare and few and far between. But generally, you'll see sort of the wealth management community, does sort of defer to ETFs. So they care a lot about sector calls. I think that, sort of wealth management type money moves a little slower. You see big reallocations at the beginning of the year. But the hedge funds, if I think about my small caps, hedge funds have been dialing up and down their bullishness on small caps when they've been dialing up and down their Fed dovishness. And then to some extent, the election morphed into those trades at the end of last year. So they're playing, they're not the only instruments they're playing, but they do an awful lot of it.
Are we going to see roll-ups? I mean, nobody in the room is old enough to remember this, but there's like every 8 or 9 years in the old days, industries would go through this mental fake M&A phase where everything would roll into one company. Are roll-ups dead, or is that going to be the catalyst for the Calvasina world?
I've honestly, from my small cap PMs are a great read on this because, they want their companies, to be bought. And then they also want new, interesting supply to come in. So they have their ear to the ground on this issue. I've not been hearing from them so much about roll-ups. I've been hearing more interest from them on divestitures, like with the bigger cap companies spinning some things off that might prove to be, sort of interesting opportunities for them. That's where I've heard more conversation, to be honest.
Interesting.
Do you expect
that's called a bolt-on.
I know.
I learned that.
Okay, very good.
I read the Duke Business Journal this week.
Exactly.
It's a bolt-on.
Do you expect bigger, better, more IPO activity this year? I've heard the Jamie Dimons of the world and Brian Moynihan's talking about that. Do you expect to see that? I mean, you've got your ear to the ground there.
Yeah, and look, I've been reading through earnings call transcripts. My team and I, and last week it was mostly financials, and we're certainly seeing, a lot of optimism around both IPOs and M&A. And I do think there's some pent-up demand. I mean, they're talking about the pipelines. There were some indications in the commentary last week that things are getting started, and certainly we all see the announcements, when we come into the office every morning.
Yeah, but do you have to IPO? I don't mean to interrupt, but we're out of time. Do you have to IPO anymore? Can't you liquefy and make gajillions?
I think
like Paul Sweeney gajillions by not IPOing now?
Well, I think there are alternatives, to be sure, and I think that's one of the things small cap managers struggle with is that
they can't get access.
Well, the lack of size appropriate IPOs, and that a lot of things that come out are too big for them to buy. Again, going back to our mid cap or large cap type discussions. Look, I think that certainly the activity has been heralded or anticipated. I'm sort of telling people I'm optimistic, but they've got really until 2Q to pull it off, or people are going to be skeptical it's ever coming.
This is great. Come back. This is great. Lori Calvasina, our extended interview. It's 9 o'clock hour. She's the RBC Capital Markets. Right now, with futures up 30, NASDAQ up a little bit more. NASDAQ not running away. The Calvasina Index, the Russell, up 0.8%. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. After an inaugural speech promising the start of what he called a golden age, President Trump signed a record number of executive actions.
Revoked nearly 80 destructive and radical executive actions of the previous administration, one of the worst administrations in history. Maybe not one of them, the worst.
The president also issued blanket pardons or commutations for people charged in the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021, including people convicted of seditious conspiracy. Michael Fanone is a former Metropolitan Police officer who lost consciousness and suffered a heart attack when a rioter shocked him with a stun gun.
I can assure you that these individuals will go on to commit acts of violence, maybe even commit acts of violence against me or members of my family. The American people own this decision.
Former Officer Fanone went on to say Donald Trump has determined that those individuals should not face any accountability solely because they committed those acts on his behalf. The Senate confirmed Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. He is the first of President Trump's cabinet nominees to win approval. Rubio was asked about Trump's statements yesterday that he wasn't confident a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas will hold.
When you're dealing with a terrorist organization that has committed atrocities and motivated by all kinds of evil, I don't think you can go in it very confident that things will hold in the long term. We're always overjoyed to see 3 hostages freed, reunited with their families, hopefully more on the way. We want it to work out.
Rubio told CBS Mornings he plans to start work today at the State Department with a series of meetings. Ohio State won its first national title since 2014, outlasting Notre Dame 34-23 in the college football playoff championship game. And a tennis note, Novak Djokovic beats Carlos Alcaraz in the Australian Open quarterfinals. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Michael, thanks so much. Molly Smith to join us here in 40 minutes here on tennis. She's like the surveillance expert. I've been waiting for this. Admiral James Stavridis on Panama. Quote, Panama has no intention of returning the Canal Zone to the U.S. A forced return to the U.S. would validate Mr. Putin's invasion of Ukraine and a potential seizure of Taiwan by China, etc. Paul, there it is. We've been efforting Stavridis. He's been very busy. But
so I mean, that's kind of the risk there. And again, it's one of the topics that President Biden kind of pulled out of nowhere. I didn't know really people were really talking about it, thinking about it too squarely. There's a lot of issues there, but I mean, you think about all the trade that goes through the Panama Canal every year and how vital it is to global trade. You like to think stability there is to the benefit of everyone, including the U.S.
Yeah, James Stavridis out on Twitter with an important statement. We'll look for him from Bloomberg Opinion Writing, I'm sure, in the coming weeks. Futures up 26, Dow futures up 170, the VIX nicely under 16, 15.77. Yields are in. The Sweeney yield celebrating its return, 4.25%, and the 2-year yield. Yields are in. All in all, dollar fractionally weak. From New York City, again on YouTube, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
It's 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. We are being brought to you by IBKR. Will U.S. oil production exceed 13.61 million barrels per day for November 2024? You can trade your prediction at Interactive Brokers. Buy yes if you agreed, no if you don't. Correct answers. Earn $1. Go to ibkr.com/forecast. Investors looking past the threat of tariffs to the potential boost from fiscal stimulus and tax cuts. Futures pushing higher ahead of the open. Bond prices also higher as the tariff threat takes something of a backseat. U.S.-listed Chinese stocks rising in the pre-market trading following gains in Hong Kong as President Trump refrained from announcing any tariffs on Chinese goods on his first day in office. And the parade of earnings marches on. 3M rising 4.8%. Management expecting profit to grow this year. D.R. Horton gaining about 3% after affirming its forecast for full-year revenue and deliveries. Right now, the Dow futures up 166 points. S&P E-mini futures 26 points higher, and the NASDAQ futures right now up 119 points. And we check the markets all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John, thanks so much. Vice President Vance in the recent moments swearing in Marco Rubio of Florida as your new Secretary of State. We'll have much more on that. And Paul, other people, I guess, to be confirmed, like today, tomorrow, and that.
Yes, so I think there's still some more to be confirmed. Some might be more contentious than others, but things are moving forward, certainly.
Nicely said, to say the least. We've been remiss on the Fed today. Let's do it right now. Andrew Hollenhorst with us, Chief U.S. Economist at Citigroup. Andrew, I've been amazingly Fed-free here. Does the Fed matter into this meeting and into Q1 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, Tom. A lot of people aren't even really paying attention to this meeting because they've signaled pretty clearly that they are going to be on pause at this meeting. Maybe they'll pause again at the next meeting. This could be a somewhat extended pause. I do still think they're on a downward trajectory with interest rates, and we shouldn't underestimate how important interest rates, policy rates, long-term rates are for the U.S. economy. That is going to be a key driver of the economy this year. But yeah, right now, everyone is focused on what's going on in D.C. and not so much what's happening with the Fed.
Vice President Vance swearing in Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I assume the president is resting. Does the president perceive the Fed as accommodative or restrictive?
Well, we heard from President Trump before taking office that he thinks that interest rates are too high. And then in his congressional testimony, we heard Scott Bessent mentioning that this is something that Trump is going to probably be making known during his presidency. He will be voicing those opinions publicly, so affirming that the Fed should be independent, but that we'll probably hear from the president what his view is on this.
So, Andrew, given what we know, what little we know, I guess, about some of the economic policies of the Trump administration, are you concerned that they will be inflationary, whether it is tariffs or changes in immigration policy? Are you concerned that they could, in fact, be inflationary?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have that risk now, and you saw a range of views from Fed officials about this. On tariffs, I think it's very early to say, and you see the market moving pretty wildly as we get, kind of indications one way or the other. I think at the end of the day, we're going to get less disruptive tariffs that will be less inflationary, probably not fully passed through into consumer prices. And then there's this whole debate about if prices rise due to tariffs, is that a one-time rise in the price level? Is that something that's more inflationary? With the inflation backdrop cooling, I think it will be easier to say one-time effect on the price level. So you're going to see where that goes with tariffs. On fiscal, that's key, and we still really don't know. We know we have some fiscal conservatives in the House. I think that means we're not going to get a super expansionary fiscal package. On the other hand, there's been discussion of raising the cap on salt. There's been discussion of no taxes on overtime, right? These would be very costly things. So we have to watch that.
Andrew Hollenhorst with us, and we will continue with Mr. Hollenhorst, Dr. Hollenhorst, I should say, as we look at the Fed here, something we've avoided this morning because we're looking at the markets. And Paul, I was remiss. I didn't mention 3M. I guess 141 to 145, 146 even. But 3M, which has had, a decade-long struggle,
Yep.
actually getting it done.
Yeah, I mean, I think reflecting some of those animal spirits are just positive economic expectations with this new administration, maybe from a policy perspective, spurring growth across the economy. So that's what a lot of folks are looking at.
I mean, I'm looking at what a transformed company. You look at the free cash flow pre-COVID on 3M, and it's just cratered. It's gone from a $5 billion down to $2 billion. Just to keep it in round numbers is a challenge, but certainly up today. Most interesting out there, again, on a Tuesday, a 4-day work week. Europe doing better than good yesterday, but the guidance here's futures up 30. And it's been pretty darn good. The yields coming in lower. Oil, I should mention, the 80 level. Brent crude, $79 a barrel. And now, to consider the markets here at 9:30 Wall Street time, John Tucker.
And there you have it, the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Right out of the gate, we are higher with the S&P 500 pushing up 28 points, a rise of 0.5%, 6,025 on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 153 points. That's a rise of 0.4%. The NASDAQ 100 right now up 116 points. That's a rise of about 0.5%. After their earnings report, shares of 3M pushing higher about 3%. D.R. Horton, after the home builder, after their earnings report, they're up 2.8% right now. And among the most actively traded, you have shares of NVIDIA up about 0.7%. Couple of factors in the driver's seat. You have those earnings report. Also lower yields and a lack of tariffs, at least right away. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Again, the VIX 15.81 flat for the morning. Paul?
Tom, Andrew is a proud product of the University of California system. Undergraduate at Berkeley, economics, and he gets a PhD in economics from UCLA. So again, another product coming out of that world-class university system. Andrew, I know you learned a lot about deficits and debt, the national debts and so on and so forth. You studied that along the way. How concerned are you about the way this U.S. government continues to run its income statement and balance sheet with these deficits?
Yeah, certainly a concern. And let me say, I do have a debt of gratitude to the University of California system. I'm very appreciative for all the education there. It doesn't matter where you went to school. I don't think it really matters if you're a trained economist or not. I mean, you just look at these numbers, and it is a concerning situation where we're running very large deficits. You graph this together with the unemployment rate. These are deficits that you typically run when you're at very high levels of unemployment. You're trying to support the economy. And that means, first, we have a structural deficit problem. And secondly, if we did have some kind of slowdown in the U.S. economy, it's not clear that there's a lot of room to support that with fiscal stimulus here. So it's something that has to be addressed in coming years. I'm not sure if it's going to be addressed in the next 2 years, but definitely something that worries me.
How about the labor market here, Andrew? By my account, it feels like a fully employed economy, reasonably good wage growth. How do you think about the U.S. labor market?
Yeah, so we've seen a labor market that's cooled down, and we had a couple months last year where we really got concerned because the SOM rule was triggering. We had moved up pretty rapidly in the unemployment rate. If you look at that data now, we've had about 6 months where the unemployment rate has just moved sideways in the low 4% range. So that's a very good place for the unemployment rate to be. It's up from its low, but it's still relatively low on a historical basis. The one thing that is still concerning to me is we have a very low hiring rate. So we don't see people being laid off from their jobs, but we also don't see businesses that are really enthusiastic about hiring. So I think we have to watch the labor market here, but so far it's been quite stable.
Andrew, we'd like to get you on again, much longer conversation. Too much to talk as we drive to the Fed meeting, the end of this month. Dr. Hollenhorst with Citigroup this morning. Paul, while you were gone, there was some angst. I mean, the markets, there was a little bit of angst. I don't oversell it. But just in the last couple of days, it's a reaffirmation of the Trump-a-thon we had, weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what you hear. Again, from the economic perspective, financial perspective, the business perspective, there is some, I'd say, elevated level of optimism out there about what can be accomplished in the coming months and years. So we'll have to see how the policies kind of align with that level of optimism.
Did you see Bitcoin got to a 109 over
Yeah,
the
how about
weekend?
that? I know, saw that.
And it bounces back here today, up $2,000, 104-ish.
Yep, absolutely.
105.
Yep, we have a little bit of a pullback in oil. We had that surge from WTI from, in the 60s up to 80. It's now pulled back for the last couple of days, but still $76 for WTI crude oil.
Dollar a little bit weaker right now. Euro dollar, everyone watching a 103.89, not giving me much of a story this morning. Our story is we're on your morning commute across the nation. Good morning, 99.1 FM in Washington. Thank you to Joe Matthew and Katie Lines and also David Gura for just incredible coverage here of the inauguration, a lengthy day put in yesterday. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast, building, growing each and every day. It is our new distribution to see the tandem rested Paul Sweeney. The Dow up 206 points. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Stocks pushing higher in the early going. A couple of factors in the driver's seat. You have the earnings report, lower yields, and lack of tariffs. Charles Schwab reporting results that exceeded estimates. It continues to attract record new inflows into the retail brokerage business. 3M out with results, expected profit to grow this year. The CEO there, William Brown, works to advance his plan to turn around the manufacturer. At D.R. Horton, the home builder, reporting earnings per share for the first quarter. They beat the average analyst estimate. Apple shares on the decline. They are down this morning after receiving a fresh pair of analyst downgrades in the latest sign that soft iPhone sales, they're becoming an increasing concern for investors. The S&P 500, 22 points higher. That's up 0.4% right now. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 204 points. That's up 0.5%. The NASDAQ 100, 14 points higher. That is up just about 0.1% right now. 2-year yield, 2 basis points lower, 4.26. The 10-year right now is down 5 basis points. That is at 4.57. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. The food in Davos, Happy Valley, this is really not reported, is horrific.
Really?
The great reason the J.P. Morgan cocktail hour, which is usually Thursday now, maybe it's Wednesday, the J.P. Morgan, they bring in the Horse d'Avours from like London or Milan or whatever.
Very good.
The only place you can get a decent dinner in Davos is the Postli restaurant. And I mean, the hitters, this is where they stay.
Okay.
It's the Morisani Schweizerkopf. It's like the hotel because you can actually have decent food and not leftover cold pizza. He's never had leftover cold pizza in Davos. Joining us, Dan Tannenbaum from the Morisani this morning, of course, with Oliver Wyman as well. Let's cut to it, Dan Tannenbaum. The president will do a virtual with people like you up Happy Valley. What will they listen for from Donald Trump?
Well, Tom, I think people are wanting to hear more specifics about how President Trump's trade policy and foreign policy agenda will work out. We obviously have gotten a preview over the last few weeks and in his inaugural address yesterday, as well as the evening press conference. But I think whether it's more of the same in terms of kind of threats for kind of trade deals or anything new, maybe there's another country he wants to invade. But right. I think there's certainly an air of pessimism until we understand more specifics of how this policy regime will unfold.
You're double-barreled at Oliver Wyman. You've got the wonderful Hugh Van Steenis with well. When you toured together, what are you talking about this new era of Trump in Europe, and of course the challenges with China? What do you and Hugh focus on?
Well, and Hugh and I had lunch today. He sends his regards. We're focused on really trying to understand how this new world order unfolds. You've already seen the new Trump administration threaten tariffs. You've seen retaliatory tariffs threatened by some country. And there's a lot of nations and companies that are frankly worried about being collateral damage. So really trying to understand whether the unintended consequences of some of these policy moves are really baked into the calculus.
So how do you feel, what's the feeling in Davos about maybe just global trade going forward over the next 4 years? Are people rethinking the nearshoring, friendshoring, that type of thing?
I think there's cautious optimism. I don't think there's any immediate change in nearshoring and friendshoring, but I think certainly the posture and change from the Biden to the Trump administration is a marked one in terms of how trade-related issues are settled. So I think there's certainly a view that this administration is more pro-business. However, the means with which they attempt to push that agenda could have some potential consequences down the road.
So what's the feeling there in Davos about this whole tariff situation? Because you see, I guess there was a little bit of relief in the market that President Trump did not announce tariffs on day one, that in fact he will study them and maybe Canada and Mexico will be first. What's the feeling in Davos about how global kind of CEOs should react?
No, and being with a lot of global banking CEOs today, I mean, look, we all had practice in the first Trump administration. So I think people are being careful not to jump to any conclusions based on some of the statements he makes until we really start to see the policy shakeout. And that's really important, is that the market not overreact to some of these statements as we begin to reacclimate essentially to the tenor of this new administration.
Dan, with the context of, we've got a minute here, maybe 2 minutes to go into it, your expertise on sanctions, are we beginning to affect Mr. Putin and Mr. Putin's Russian domestic economy?
So that's the question. The sanctions that President Biden imposed a week ago Friday were fairly significant in further restricting access for countries to buy Russian oil by beginning to close the loophole that allowed certain legal purchases. Now, there's actually a moment for the new Trump administration to leverage authorities that the Biden administration imposed at the end of 23 on secondary sanctions by really trying to force third country actors that continue to trade with Russia and the U.S. to make a choice more aggressively. And those sanctions cost very little to the American taxpayer versus military aid and other sorts of aid that are provided. So there is a certain mechanism that can be applied. And, with Russia, it was always going to be the long game in terms of sanctions to really isolate the economy. But there is more that can be done, and there's more that could be done in the coming weeks by the Trump administration.
So, Dana, just real quickly, is there an expectation that this Trump administration will move to end this war in Ukraine quickly?
Well, I think you've already heard President Trump begin to say the challenge is in ending this quickly. Whether President Zelensky agrees to whatever terms exist, I mean, this is not the simplest thing to end with the snap of fingers. There's a lot of questions on the table in terms of what peace ultimately looks like. But, I mean, reinforcing the Western coalition, I mean, in the inaugural address, there was no mention of Ukraine. Yep. President Zelensky speaks here this afternoon in Davos. And it will be helpful to hear beyond what Scott Bessent said at his confirmation hearing next week, how sanctions will play a role in this foreign policy agenda.
Dan Tannenbaum, thank you so much. With Oliver Wyman from Davos this morning. Perhaps we can catch up with him on the backside of Davos as well. The Dow up 338 points. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, John. After an inaugural speech promising the start of what he called a golden age, President Trump signed a record number of executive actions on issues like immigration, federal workers, and energy. The president also issued blanket pardons or commutations for people charged in the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Bloomberg's David Gura was asked about the pardons.
I think this is something that his base was expecting, hoping and expecting that he would do here. But for those who remember well that day and have kind of watched this dark mythology kind of take over what actually happened, then it's kind of the continuation of that. And I think it's something that we'll be talking about not just over the course of this term, but I think throughout American history. Again, what happened on January 6th, of course, and then also just how it's been dealt with here with the pardons that the president imposed yesterday.
Bloomberg's David Gura. Marco Rubio has been confirmed unanimously by the Senate to be the next Secretary of State. This, as one of those executive orders that President Trump issued, would delay a TikTok ban, giving the company and its Chinese parent ByteDance more time to reach a deal to sell the app in the U.S. Rubio was in support of the law as a senator and said what Trump is doing now is not against the law.
The law was written in such a way so it would have kicked in the day before a new administration. So I think it's fair to assume that a new administration would need more than just a handful of hours coming into power to make a decision on how they want to handle it, on which deal they think would be the right one.
Secretary of State Rubio was on ABC's Good Morning America. A rare winter storm is charging through Texas and the northern Gulf Coast. It's closed highways and airports and prompted the first blizzard warning for southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, John.
Apple south today. A good drop south.
Yep.
The NASDAQ underperformance here is, I'm going to call it an Apple event. Jefferies a bit tepid. They're worried about iPhone sales.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
China.
Sure. And that's kind of been in the back of every, I think, analyst and investor's mind for Apple is China. What is the long-term risk
90
from
days
China?
were we having the same conversation?
I think so. I think so. Maybe Tim Cook can, with now maybe being on the inside potentially of this Trump administration, having a good relationship with Trump, maybe that can help in some ways.
I don't know.
We'll
have to see. Sweeney, and he nailed it with Djokovic. I'm not really watching the Australian Open.
I know.
But you were forceful. You just went to our team.
Said,
you were tough on the interns there.
Sure.
Get Molly Smith.
Get Molly Smith, the voice
Molly
of tennis.
Smith's coming up. Surveillance. Good morning.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. This is a joy here. Now joining us, surveillance tennis correspondent, one M. Smith. And this is, you got to understand, Paul, winter stays in Syracuse, New York till somewhere about May 15th. Yep. So you rock out at the Skytop tennis courts at Syracuse. It's like rock star facilities. It's like UCLA in the East.
Yep.
Molly Smith has knocked the ball around there. She is the surveillance tennis correspondent.
All right, Molly Smith joins us. She's an editor for Bloomberg News. That's her day job, but we love chatting with her about tennis because she is a tennis aficionado. So we've got a Grand Slam going on in Australia. It's frustrating for us in this side of the world because we don't get to see it really because they're on the other side of the globe. Give us the quick snapshot what's happening in Australia.
You just got to wake up in the middle of the night, Paul. I mean, it's a very simple solution.
Okay.
I mean, my schedule for the past week has been trying to stay up until 2, wake up around like 7, and try to make it off of that schedule. But it's been amazing. I mean, today, obviously, the highlight, Djokovic beating Alcaraz in 4 sets. It was epic. I mean,
I consider that an upset. I mean, because Alcaraz is kind of approaching, if not at his peak, and you could argue Djokovic just because of his age, despite everything he's accomplished, maybe not as strong as Alcaraz, but boy, big win.
The odds makers for sure would have had Alcaraz winning this. I mean, if I had any money riding on it, I would have had Alcaraz winning it. But in my heart, I wanted Djokovic to win just for the sake of history. I mean, this is incredible. This man, 37 years old. He's going for a record 25th major, 11 in Australia. I mean, it's unheard of that he's still doing this. And he just completely outplayed Alcaraz from, the middle of the second set on.
Can you extrapolate the season forward from Australia? If it's the kickoff, it's summer down there. Everybody remembers Rod Laver over a certain vintage. But can you extrapolate the performance here into the rest of the season?
I mean, I think it maybe bodes well more for what can you say about who's in good hardcourt form rather than the entire season. It's a little tough to make such a judgment like that because there are players who peak in different times of the year. Right. I mean, they're coming off of what could be a nice offseason, but there isn't much of an offseason in tennis. It's maybe a couple weeks at most. So I think it's hard to even think past Australia right now because we still have, the rest of the quarterfinals and the championships to get through. But, after this, there's a little bit more of a hard court season, eventually into the clay, the grass, and it's just a lot different depending on who's coming up.
Match to match, who's going to win? Like Badosa takes out Coco Gauff.
Yeah. I was actually pulling for that too. I felt a little unpatriotic to say that, but
okay. But I follow Emma, and if Emma's out, I don't care. But the answer is, does anybody have a clue who's going to win a given match?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think odds makers would say Iga's a very strong favorite against Emma. Even though I'm with you, I'm pulling for her too. I mean, I think right now Sinner is probably still the favorite on the men's side. Hasn't really been tested all that much, but I mean, hopefully, the rest of his matches will be at night. He's really only struggled in the heat out there. It's up, we can't relate here in New York, but out there it's 90 degrees right now.
So on the women's side, who should I be focusing on?
Goodness. I mean, Badosa just looks so good against Gauff, and it's just amazing to see her comeback. A year ago, she was thinking about maybe retiring from tennis, had a brutal back injury, and, now is into her first major semifinal. Like the way that she's playing. I think Sabalenka is still the odds-on favorite, though. Hard to root against her.
Do they have outdoor courts at Syracuse?
Oh, yeah. They start getting used once it's above 40 Fahrenheit.
Like June. You're in finals and you're finally outdoors.
Yeah, we played mostly indoors when I was up there.
So it's least.
But it's hardly the experience of playing on Rod Laver.
Yeah. Don't be a stranger. Molly Smith, thank you so much. You should see her on clay. She's a terror on clay. I say Molly Smith, surveillance tennis correspondent here at the Australian Open. Aryna Sabalenka from Belarus.
I know.
You follow this.
I do.
I have no
Molly
idea.
kind of tells me where to focus, because otherwise I'll watch some match that nobody cares about. So
we're playing the president's music today. We did Carrie Underwood earlier, Brooks and Dunn. Casey Musgrave from Nashville. Good morning. Alex Steele next.